Call the meeting to order, please. This is the Village of Riverside Board of Trustees regular meeting for Thursday, August 7th, 2014. The time is 7 o'clock. I'd ask you to please call the roll.
President Sells.
Here.
Trustee Hamilton. Here. Trustee Pollock.
Here.
Trustee Ballerine.
Here.
Trustee Collins.
Here.
Trustee Foley.
Here.
Also present, Village Manager Scalera.
Here.
Village Attorney Molina.
Here.
Village Attorney Mars.
Here.
And Village Clerk Haley.
Thank you very much. We have a quorum. If you'd please rise for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you and welcome everyone who's here and those watching at home. If you're here with us this evening and you would like to make a comment at any time during the meeting, feel free to do so. I just ask that you be recognized by the President and that you make your comments from the podium so that the folks at home can hear and see what you have to say. First up this evening is a very pleasant opportunity, the swearing in of a new patrol officer, Joseph Mahana. Chief Weitzel.
Mr. President and trustees, I would ask Officer Joseph Mahana to come up next to me. We're good. I will brief the board on Joe in a minute, and I will have Joe come up and introduce his family and friends that are here. But I'd ask the clerk to do the swearing in first, and then I'll take it from there.
Please raise your right hand, repeat after me. I, Joseph Mahana, do solemnly swear
I, Joseph Mahana, do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
and the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
and that I will faithfully perform the duties
and I will faithfully perform the duties
of Patrol Officer of the Village of Riverside
of a patrol officer of the Village of Riverside
to the best of my ability.
to the best of my ability.
Congratulations.
I'd like to tell the board a little bit about Joe and really how he came here, because normally he would have been in front of the board earlier, but let me give you a little bit of his background and tell you why we're here a little bit later. Joe has a bachelor's degree from Indiana University, majoring in finance with a minor in criminal justice. He worked for the Indiana University Police Department before joining the Riverside Police Department. He's 27 years old and I believe just moved to Chicago, right?
Yep.
So a Chicago resident. He does have his family and friends here today. And he was actually injured shortly after starting in a training accident, which was a relatively serious training accident. During one of our physical fitness training exercises, he had a pectoral muscle that was torn. It's very similar to a rotator cuff injury, and he was out for 4 months. But shortly after being injured, being a new officer, he paid a visit to my office and wanted to make sure that the department wasn't going to give up on him because he was not completed his probation, he was not off his probation, and was a little bit uneasy that we might cut our losses with him. And I assured him that we wouldn't do that. He was injured in a legitimate training exercise, and he was an outstanding pick by our police and fire board when they selected him as his position on the list to be hired. So he put in over 4 months of rehab, physical fitness rehab, and he would come into the police department on his own time so he could maintain the bond that had developed with the shift he's working, because he works permanent 3 to 11s, as our officers have permanent shifts. And, you know, he was relatively new, so they didn't really know him. So I was very impressed by his determination, his rehabbing to get back to full strength, and then returning to duty. And that's why he's before the board here in August. He actually would have completed his year earlier, but we extended it because of his injury. So he is an outstanding officer. Some of his shift members are here tonight. His work ethic, I can tell you, is outstanding. He really excelled. His doctor told him he'd be back in 6 months, and Joe came back in 4 and passed all the required tests. So I would ask that he step up. He could address the board, and I would like him to introduce anybody that's here from his family or friends.
Hi, thank you all for giving me this opportunity. This village is actually amazing, from all of you to the residents. I don't think I've ever met anybody so pro-police in my life. I have my family here, my mother, my father, and my girlfriend, Steve, Florence, and Colleen. Thank you. Without you guys, this wouldn't be possible. Thanks for supporting me through everything. I'm just so happy to be part of this town, this village. Through the training that I've been through, even in this short time, I've realized that this is a top-notch police department, and I'm excited to do another 30 years here. Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys still be here in 30 years too, Chief?
Yes. I don't know. You have to ask my wife.
What are we walking on now?
Thank you very much. Next up is public comment. Would anyone like to address the board? Mr. Gallegos.
Alex Gallegos, 3234 South Harlem. Good evening, Mr. President, trustees, those in attendance, and to those watching at home. Sir, I come before you and the Village Board on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce. It is my pleasure to inform the public of the upcoming Chamber events. Next Thursday, here on Burlington Street, on August 14th, we'll be hosting our third cruise night of the season. It'll start at 6 o'clock and end at 9. We expect about 150 vehicles, assuming Mother Nature will be on our side. Person of the Year, a tradition in our town since the 1950s, has been named from the Lions Club and the Chamber. It is everybody's favorite aunt, Patty McLaurin from Aunt Diana's. Dinner will be held in her honor on September 10th. That's a Wednesday at the Golf Club. It'll begin at 6 with cocktails and dinner at 7. Dress is semi-formal. Tickets are $43 per person, and they will be available next week from Arcade Jewelers, Riverside Bank, and the library. Any questions, they can be directed to me at 708-442-5704. And the last point I want to talk about is the annual car show that we will have around the Water Tower Museum campus and on Blooming Bank. That will be on Sunday, September 28th. That'll be a Sunday all-day event from 9 to 5 in the afternoon. And on that, we do expect about 200 to 300 cars from all over. And that's all I have for today, sir. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to address the board at this point? Hearing none, we'll move on to the reports of village officers. First up was the village president's report. I have a motion, would ask for a motion to appoint Georgine Poulos to the Riverside Police Pension Board. Motion by Mr. Foley, second by Ms. Collins. Any discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Trustee Hamilton. Here. Yes, I'm sorry.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Foley.
Motion carries. Welcome Ms. Poulos to the Police Pension Board. She brings a wealth of experience and financial knowledge, and I believe our clerk is going to do the swearing in this evening.
I, Georgine Poulos, do solemnly swear
I, Georgine Poulos, do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
and the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
and that I will faithfully perform the duties
and I will faithfully perform the duties
of the office of Riverside Police Pension Board Trustee. Feel free to read along. Of the office
of Riverside Police Pension Board Trustee
for the Village of Riverside,
for
Illinois,
the Village of Riverside, Illinois,
to the best of my ability.
to the best of my ability.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I do need your signature. Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you, and I welcome the opportunity to give something back to the community. I've been a 30-year resident of Riverside.
We're very glad to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service. The only other thing I have this evening is I would like to mention that our neighboring community in Berwyn has the moving wall is visiting in Berwyn in Proxca Park. It's a miniature replica of the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. It'll be here through the 11th, so I would urge everyone to take a moment of remembrance and go by and see. It's a very moving and beautiful memorial. On August 9th at 8 o'clock, officials from the various communities surrounding the area will be there to honor specifically the folks that we lost from our village. And I will be there to memorialize John Bezekny and Donald Pratt, who we lost in the war. So please take a moment to go by and pay your respects. And that is all I have this evening. Mr. Manager.
I have just a few items. The first is I wanted to provide the board and the community an update in regards to Swan Pond. Since our last board meeting, staff has removed all debris from the mouth of the culvert, so it is free of any blockages. We have discussed with the Army Corps the process that they will follow to repair the culvert pipe that is currently exposed. If you've been by Swan Pond, you've probably seen the tree service out there, and we have now removed 22 of the 30 ash trees that were in Swan Pond that have succumbed to the emerald ash borer. We have also met with our village engineer, who is currently working on putting together a proposed plan for regrading to address some of the concerns that were raised, repair of the embankment further north of the culvert, and then staff has also met with the contractor who recently made the repairs to the WPA wall on getting pricing to add a top layer to that wall near the old Fairbank Dam location to help hopefully minimize any future water flow from the river during significant storm events. The second is I wanted to alert the community next Thursday, August 14th, here in Village Hall in the auditorium, we will be having a public hearing where we will be taking any kind of feedback that residents may have in regards to our current refuse collection service. I encourage you all to attend. If you are unable to do so, there is an email website. On our website, you can click on the email link that will send whatever comments you want, pro or against, to the village, and we will then file that and use that as part of our consideration in moving forward. I wanted to acknowledge the hard work of our police department this past few weeks. They've been very, very busy, and they've really stepped up, and as Chief Weitzel indicated, the caliber of new employees just speaks to our existing force. We are very fortunate to have a very professional and very motivated and dedicated police force, and because of their hard work, they were able to make a number of arrests in some of the occurrences that have occurred in the past few weeks here. So thank you to the police department. And then finally, I wanted to introduce our new village intern, Sean Jacobs. Sean is a 2014 ICMA Association Local Government Management Fellow candidate. He holds a degree, his MPA from the University of Illinois Chicago, and his graduate degree from Indiana University. Sean recently joined the village, and he's already immersed himself in the website RFP and our waste contract RFP process. So we look forward to expanding his learning experience here and showing him what local government is all about. And that is all I have.
Well, John. When is give me the date and time for the meeting one more time on the waste contract?
Thursday, August 14th at 7 p.m. Here in the auditorium.
August 14th at 7. That's an important one if anybody has any feedback as we go. The contract is up this year, so we're going to be renegotiating the contract. So if you have opinions about our waste pickup and management, please make your feelings heard. That's it. Okay. Moving on, next is the approval of the consent agenda. Are there any items that anyone needs to have removed? Seeing none, I'd ask for a motion and a second to approve.
Motion to approve.
Motion by Ms. Collins, second by Mr. Foley. Please call the roll.
Trustee Hamilton.
Here. I don't know what is wrong with
Trustee
you.
Pollock.
I'm sorry.
Trustee Ballerine.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Foley.
Aye.
Motion carries. Next up is the reports of departments and commissions. Mr. Weitzel.
Mr. President, if it's okay, I would ask that we move up the Explorer's report.
Of course.
And I'd ask Officer Greenewald to come up and make his report as he has to get back to duty. I would just like to mention, I'll let Brian speak about the conference, but I would like to just remind the board that it's an outstanding service that the Explorers do for the village. And Brian, you should know that this is all volunteer time, and I continue to be amazed. And he travels with them, and he's able to obtain insurance for the travel and the young men that go with him through the Boy Scouts of America, and he takes care of all these processes on his own. We're really fortunate to have somebody of Officer Greenewald's caliber that will dedicate his time not only to bettering incidents that happen in the village, but these are young men and women that want to be law enforcement officers, whether that be federal or local in the future, and he really helps mold them. I can tell you that has to be 4 or 5 graduates from our Explorer post, if not more, that are currently in law enforcement. So I just asked Brian to come up and maybe brief the board on the national conference he just attended.
The Riverside Police Explorer Post is a group of young men and women that want to be police officers. Recently, I had the opportunity to take 4 young men to Bloomington, Indiana, at Indiana University for the national conference. The conference is held every other year. 2 years ago, we went to Colorado. Thankfully, this was a 4-hour drive versus an 18-hour drive with a bunch of teenage boys. It's a great conference. It's run by the Boy Scouts and has participation from all the federal agencies. So our explorers were able to learn from the DEA doing arrest and search, firearms from the Air Marshals, bomb scene from the ATF, and traffic stops from the Indiana State Police. So it's a great opportunity for the explorers. There were, I believe, 2,300 explorers there, including explorers from Puerto Rico, Hawaii, New York, California, all across the United States. It's a great opportunity. They get to compete as well as attend seminars that are taught again by different members of law enforcement. And I just want to thank the board because a lot of towns our size aren't able to have a program like the Explorers. We're fortunate that we give these kids a chance to learn about law enforcement, and they take advantage of it. I mean, I was a police explorer here in Riverside too long ago. Sergeant Coder was an explorer here. We have explorers all across Illinois that have made their way in law enforcement. So I want to thank the board again for having the program, for allowing me to advise them, and for allowing us to travel to these conferences because it is greatly appreciated.
Questions
I
for?
do have one question. You said young men and women?
Yes.
And are the young women allowed to go to the conference even though it's sponsored by the Boy Scouts?
Yes, they are. It's a co-ed program. There are just as many excellent female explorers as a male. There's a officer from Oswego who runs their post who used to be a Riverside Police Explorer when I was here.
Okay.
So it's a great opportunity for both male and
Thank you.
females. Mhm.
Thank you for taking it.
Well, we're very proud of our explorers, and we do appreciate greatly the time and dedication you put into mentoring our young people.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. President and trustees, I thought I would brief the board on the 6-month crime stats and activity that I usually do. So I really start with the crime stats. These are preliminary. They are mandated to be reported to the state police at the 6-month interval, which I've done. The memo I prepared and the crime memo prepared by Sergeant Lara shows that as of June 30th, the village would have about an 8.2% increase numerically or percentage-wise over the same period from 2013. But I would once again caution you against the percentages, even if it's plus or minus. As you can see, that really means in 2013 we had 73 reportable crimes, and this year, the first 6 months, we had 79. So it was really only 6 more reportable crimes, but because of the low nature of violent crime in Riverside, the numbers, the percentages can sometimes look much larger than they really are. Not every crime is reportable under the Illinois rules, and they have to apply by the federal rules. The federal government only requires that felony crimes be reported with one exception, and that's domestic violence crimes. So the year-end report won't be done until probably February or March, because it takes, the state is always late in getting those numbers out to the local police departments. But when the year-end report is out, I'll brief the board first before it's made public. If you have any questions on the actual crime stats, I'd be happy to answer those.
I have a question on 2 of the areas, and I recognize that, especially when the numbers are small, the percentages can be skewed considerably. But I wondered if you had any thoughts about, number one, the felony arrests, which there seemed to be like twice as many as in the previous year. And the other question related to the much higher incidence of domestic violence. Did you have any thoughts about either of those?
The domestic violence arrests are up sharply. Those fall under domestic battery, domestic assault, could even be damage to property, because if you have a marital relationship, dating relationship, you can even, under Illinois statute, even engaged falls under domestic violence. You have to arrest under that statute. And why that's significant is because it's the only misdemeanor statute in the state of Illinois that you cannot bond out on. Every other misdemeanor, you can post $150 bond and be out the door. On any domestic violence case, you must appear in front of a judge, the next available bond hearing. And what we've noticed, that we've had more and more individuals, younger individuals, being arrested for domestic battery and domestic violence. We've had a sharp increase in dating relationship domestic batteries. And that's really what is driving it this year. I can't say as to why that is, but we've had more and more that are not actually marital relationships. So I'm not sure if that's a trend, because the state and the government hasn't put out their report, but it's certainly a trend in Riverside.
Would this be juvenile?
Yes, it counts all. While the juvenile crimes don't get published by law, they do get reported by law. So that includes all arrests, and there are juvenile arrests included there. So that could mean that a 15-year-old battered their parents, and the parents want to report that to the police, and the parents want them prosecuted. What actually happens is you have to make that arrest, and it's referred to the juvenile court system. Most of the time, those are referred in what's called petitions, and the judge will decide on whether that actually goes forward. But the police have to abide by the same statute, so we have to house juveniles not at our facility. We have to take them to an off-site facility run by DCFS until they can appear in front of a judge.
Are these individual people, or are there repeat ones within that number, or are these each individual incidents?
Unfortunately, there are repeat ones.
I wondered about that.
They're not, usually if you get a second or third time, the judge will set a bond high enough that the defendant doesn't get out. But I think it's kind of sad that I would say second or third time, because Some of those incidents can be pretty violent, and those affect the whole household, especially those that have children in the household. There's very strict rules that govern bonding out of domestic violence defendants, and one of them is a 72 no contact order. The husband or wife or boyfriend or girlfriend or even the juvenile is not allowed to return to the residence for 72 hours. And it even, for juveniles, it can cause them school issues too. So that's why DCF gets involved in the juvenile cases. Okay. My activity report is up substantially. The number of police calls just for service is up 7%. Now, that's everything from criminal activity to officers being called for bike thefts to dogs at large. Whatever call an officer has to respond to, that's the overall amount of calls as of June 30th. But the ones that really stick out is the felony arrests is up 93%. And we are up significantly because we've had more crimes that fall under the felony statutes. And every year there's more and more crimes. I would say that every time during the election year when crimes are made laws down in Springfield, you rarely will hear of a misdemeanor statute being enacted in Springfield. They're felony statutes, which comes a lot of requirements come with felony statutes. Holding prisoners for bond, state's attorneys need to be involved in it. Felony review needs to be involved in the process. Detectives need to be involved. There's a lot of strings that come along with those statutes. So we have had, and that includes juvenile arrests too, so that's overall, not just an adult, that's total arrests for the village. That's one that's really up. Accident reports are up this year so far, 31%. I can tell you that about 13 of them have happened up in the construction zone on First and Forest area between Wabansie and 31st. Fortunately, most of those have been fender benders so far. But that area during the construction has had a lot of slow speed accidents. We're about same pace for citations. DUIs are up. Juvenile arrests are up 45%. And those could be arrests and those could just be activities. So there are cases where officers have to handle a juvenile case, but it doesn't end up in an arrest or petition, but we still have to report those. So the activity is significantly up. I don't see that decreasing if July is any indication. These numbers only include till June 30th of 2014. So tomorrow, these numbers will be shared. They probably already shared with the media in the board's packet tonight, but they will also be posted on our website for our residents to view.
Any other questions? I was wondering, perhaps you could brief us on the plans you have with regard to First Avenue with the start of school. I know you've been working on some enhanced protection and enforcement in that area.
We did. We held a meeting I think it was the 30th, July 30th, out at the scene of the construction site, with all the stakeholders, District 96, District 208, police, fire, police jurisdictions from our neighboring towns. IDOT was there, Water Reclamation was there, and the IDOT safety coordinator showed up from their main office. And we developed a plan, a walking plan and then the crossing plan. And what I wanted to know from them is if they're on schedule, and I can tell you they're not. And it's not, and IDOT kind of stays out of it now because it's not their project yet. It's still Water Reclamation's project. So there's a lot more bedrock there than they had anticipated. There's 15 feet of bedrock. I think they told me they were anticipating 5 to 7 feet of bedrock. So they're still doing a lot of work there. My officers tell me they're there. The 3 to 11 officer says they started working at nighttime now. But you can go by there and see them working into the night. The plan is when Water Reclamation is done, IDOT wants to come right in and get started. However, IDOT won't. There's certain things they won't do. The asphalt they won't do depending on weather, and the cement pours they won't do depending on weather. So They told us at the scene that they anticipate the entire project to completely be done not until June of 2015. And that would be everything, traffic lights, pedestrian lights, roadway improvements, striping, putting in the new curbs. I'm hoping they stick to that schedule, because there may be some time in like January, February they don't do work. Because if IDOT can't do the cement and road work they need to do in that weather, there'll be no action taking place at that intersection. So the plan that we developed was the kids that are walking westbound Forest from the center of town need to use the south side. The north sidewalk is going to continue to be closed almost through the entire project. The IDOT said the last thing they'll do is pour the curbs and put the street lights up, the traffic lights up. Their original plan was to do all 4 curbs at once, and I informed them they can't do that, because if they do all 4 intersections at once, how could anybody cross the street? We couldn't use the north side or the south side. So they've agreed to do one side, the south side when it gets to that point, and then when the south side's done, they'll open the north side. They'll switch it when they do it, so they'll allow us to have a sidewalk open, or they will pay for a bridge, a temporary walkway that'll be about 6 feet with railings that would go from the sidewalk that isn't poured yet. I said, well, that would be a disaster, because how are you going to put the railings in the middle of First Avenue? I said, I don't think that would work even with our crossing guards, so they're going to rethink that one and take my suggestion of just one side at a time. But the kids will walk at Groveland. The Department of Public Works is restriping all the roadway stripings up there. They're putting in new signages by the 12th. They're putting a pedestrian crosswalk sign in the middle of the intersection at Groveland. They're trimming all trees that go to First Avenue so the signs have clear visibility. We're going to have a crossing guard on the east and west side of the street, so that when they get across First Avenue, we can cross them back to Ridgewood, especially the kids that are going to the Hollywood School. The community service officer will be assigned there in a marked police car to help with the traffic control for the students, for the parking issues in front of the high school. And for the first week or so, my operations lieutenant will be up there to see if we need to do any changes. We've also retrained all the crossing guards with the state mandated training, and we had a meeting with them yesterday, and any of the crossing guards that didn't have cell phones, we bought them those disposable cell phones, and we've issued to them in case there's an emergency at First Avenue, we want them to be able to call us immediately. So that has been done. It was agreed upon to everybody that Riverside would, since it was our jurisdiction, we would develop the plan, but they all signed off on that plan before we sent it out. It went around to all the players. They gave the input, and we recently just published that. So I'm hoping that parents will listen to us, because one of the biggest problems that IDOT and we see is that when they get close to the school, it's going to be bottleneck, and they'll start letting their kids off in the middle of the street so they could walk another 200 feet to get to the school. Well, if the north sidewalk is closed, the kids would have to cross Forest Avenue to get on the south sidewalk, so they'd be getting out of the car in the middle of the street on Forest. So we've installed 3 signs, temporary signs, that say no student drop off, and we're hoping that they wouldn't let their kids off on First Avenue when they get the bottleneck, and just let their kids off in the middle of the street and tell them to cross and get up to the parkway and walk to the school. But IDOT thought maybe that wasn't a big problem because there's not a lot of speed up there. The cars are bottlenecked, but I disagree with that. I think anytime you'd be letting a child off in the middle of First Avenue, there would always be a problem. So the school is going to e-blast the plan out to District 208 kids. District 96 told me they would post it on their website and send it home to parents. I'm not sure if that's been done yet, but the superintendent said she would do that. And I've released it to both our local newspapers. I'm hoping that they will cover it and put that out to parents. I have had several calls from parents before that happened and wanted to know what our plan was. Now that it's out, I have not received any phone calls, at least negatively, against it. But there was a lot of effort put into the ensuring that these kids can at least cross in a safe manner at also Groveland, but also First Avenue.
Any other questions about that? Thank you, Chief.
And my final item in front of the board tonight is the closed-circuit television study and research that I did for the public system that would be at entranceways, if the village choose to so go with that, to the village. In your packet should be my 3-page memo and then the report that was prepared by the one vendor that was willing to give us information without having a contract. They were not the only one we contacted. The other ones we contacted to give us data and to really just help us do research didn't really want to put in the effort if there really was no chance right now of a guaranteed return. And I told them, there wasn't. I was looking for research on the project so I could brief my board on whether they wanted to go through with it or not. So the packet that you have is the only company that responded to my request. So I don't know how the manager would like me to do this. I could either just take questions from the board, or if the board has questions from the memo that they'd like to ask me. I did put, I didn't have it in your packet, I did put what the standard would look like at your places. At least that's the type of camera they've installed in other communities that are similar to us. I should make it clear that the community of Burr Ridge that they didn't put these in because Burr Ridge is laid out a little bit differently, and they were able to put lower end cameras in the entrances to the gated subdivisions. But these types of poles can be from 7 to 10 feet, and that's depending on the location they put it in, because you need to be high enough for sightline, you need to be high enough to get a full shot of the car, and it's also wireless. The information is being fed back to a system at the police department where you could view it if need be. So sightline is important.
No other questions here. Anyway, when I was reading about it, I know that when I read through the technical specifics about it, it talks about being vandal-proof and everything, but I guess my very first thought when I was reading about this was 7 to 10 feet. Didn't seem like very far away for somebody with a baseball bat who wants to disarm one of these. And I was just wondering if you picked up any information from communities that have installed these on, do people try to vandalize them, or?
They do. That's why they like to put them higher. They do have a special camera. Like they've had incidents where people have spray painted them. Now, they has a lens cover that you can just pop off. Well, not just pop off, but it takes some maneuvering, and then they can put a new lens cover over it. It's like a plastic shield.
Yeah.
Some communities that have actually got these type from this company, they've done landscaping around it, but not landscaping to 10 feet, obviously.
Yeah.
They've done some just ground cover in the area, and they have had instances where they've had auto accidents or drunk drivers that have hit those poles. If they don't consider that any different than the poles that are hit for the red light cameras, is what they tell me. But they have had, depending on how close it is to the roadway, they have had auto accidents that have taken down those poles too.
I would just, Tom, ask if you could, just quickly for the public that may be watching or in attendance, describe what the purpose of these cameras would be. I don't want specifically that they're not for traffic enforcement.
No, these are, what almost everybody uses these type of cameras for is post-event investigations. There is no real clear data that anybody can find, including the companies, that it prevents crime from taking place, but it certainly helps investigators once the crime has happened. They have far much more data on post-event arrests. So what it's used for is it has the 3 cameras that it has on there. One is for an overview. Then they have a license plate recognition, but it doesn't automatically run it through a computer system. So anybody that drives through the village doesn't get their license plate run through the Secretary of State's database. It's just kept in case we need to investigate. Then we would go back and, with a legitimate investigation purpose, and be able to run the license plate with the Secretary of State to see where the car lists to once a crime has happened. The 3rd camera is our facial recognition. That also does not get run through a database. It's just showing who's driving the car, like a red light photo enforcement ticket. So you could say that this Chevy Blazer with this plate was being driven by a female white. When the suspect was a 16-year-old male, he might be using somebody else's car. So that's the facial recognition. It doesn't run it through any national or local databases. Any follow-up with the databases has to be done by an investigator. And they have had This company does far beyond Illinois. They've done a lot of larger municipalities, and they've done sporting venues too, where they use it for the gates at large venues. So the real idea here would be to catch vehicles and their drivers if an incident happens. So for an example would be, we have a resident reports that somebody tried to grab their child in front of the school. And the car was a Chevy Blazer, green in color, and was last seen going eastbound on Burlington. Well, if we have a camera somewhere at Harlem and Burlington, there's a possibility if they didn't turn off, given the time that the victim would give us, that we could play the tape and see if a car of that description passes, and that's where you'd start the investigation. You could get the license plate, if there's one on it, description of the car, and who's it actually. It'll catch the front seat passengers. So if there's a front seat passenger, they won't capture who's in the back. But it'll give you clear, concise pictures. This is a high-end system. It's not like some of those grainy videos you may see that the news plays sometimes on some of these cases that the police submit to them. It's very high-end.
Since we finessed the video ordinance several years ago, you've had video actually solve several crimes in the town already from different public or private cameras that are on, the banks or the gas stations and things. Could we incorporate a public-private partnership where we have some of our entrances covered by I think of Minuteman, for example. They have a camera at the west end of their parking lot facing their pumps.
They do.
We could could we discuss with them placing a camera facing the street that would be monitored by Minuteman, but because we can have access to it at any time, we would be able to get more entrances or egresses from the village done in a private, like for example RB. They have to have security cameras.
We do, and we have a written agreement we have a policy and a written agreement with the high school because it tapes the hallways, and our privacy agreement with the high school is we don't monitor that 24 hours. We don't monitor the kids walking around. We only access the RB system if there's a call for service to the school or there's an incident. So the video doesn't stream at the 911 center. That's our agreement. We have used Minuteman, for example. They'll allow us their cameras anytime. Whether they would point it in the street or something, we'd have to ask them, or if they put another camera in, because if they point it in the street, maybe it'd be taken away from what they want to catch.
Well, I would say we would partner with them to purchase a second camera to put it in there, or with RB to have a camera at the corner where it faces forest. Yeah. Well,
their outside camera at RB High School already catches the intersection. We've used that many times to help us in accident investigations and bike thefts. The cameras at the high school sweep, but the corner cameras are very wide-ranging. But we could ask the banks that have the outside cameras. They're a little reluctant to give us the inside cameras because of their customers, and the banks are also required by federal law. They have different requirements. They do have to be burglar, have alarms and video cameras, but we'd have to look into what the partnership would be. But I think it'd be easier for the Minutemans, and the 7-Eleven at Harlem and 26 has a very extensive video system too.
Well, in District 96, I'm sure there's cameras at Hauser and Central. Is there cameras that are accessible to us that even if we even invested money in their systems to get us up and running,
There might be. I think we'd have to look legally if we could enter an agreement with them. And one, the storage capacity. Would we be storing the video? Would we have to buy a video management system to do the storage? Because a lot of it runs into, when we do get an arrest, the state's attorneys really want us to lock down the evidence. So the video evidence is important for us, the integrity of that. So we'd have to kind of make sure that just the clerk at the 7-Eleven couldn't be able to alter it, or we were just going there and retrieving the video, but they also still had the video. I could tell you the state's attorney's office would want us to confiscate the video, take it, so we could put it in as evidence, and that they wouldn't have access to it anymore, meaning the establishment. So There, I mean, it's a possibility we could look into. I guess the first thing we do is see what businesses would be open to that idea to begin with. And then I guess the next step was if there were businesses opening, then we'd have to logistically see if it could even be done. I don't know of any other I do know communities that tie into the banks at their 911 center, and they tie into the high school. And some of them tie into the private cameras that are in subdivisions, because some of these subdivisions are actually they're not actually, the streets in the subdivision of some communities aren't owned by the village. So they enter into agreements with them to get their video too. So, I mean, I'm sure that we could look. We wouldn't be the first one looking at it, but it would take me some time to do that research. But I think the first thing I'd do if the board directed me is to write a letter to all the businesses and find out who has the systems and if they'd even be willing to share it with us.
I think this is a good idea. I think it's something we should look at least down the road. And I think trying to build a public-private partnership would make sense, because it would allow us to have more entrances and exits from the village covered, and we can then cover the ones that that aren't, and we could maybe fill in all the gaps. I mean, I think it's a strong law enforcement tool.
It is. The video surveillance, when used properly, is a very good tool. I would agree. It's an excellent post-event tool.
How long do you keep the video?
If we actually get a crime, we're keeping it forever, probably. But right now...
No, I mean, did they suggest how long you would keep?
Yes. They suggested 90 days at a minimum. And that's why they would have to build. If we went with the system, we'd have to get the management system in the department. Our current IT would not be able to handle the streaming of the video and the collection and the data, because we also have to be able to, burn it to something for court purposes. But they suggest a minimum 90 days. I know David did some of to 120 days, because you don't know, somebody's going to come in 2 months and say that this incident happened, and you want to still have some availability to capture that.
I have a question about the cost on the memo. I just want to make sure I'm reading it correctly here. So the pre-location with pole and power, $11,305, and then you would add in the $8,745 for the installation.
No,
So,
the way they explained it to us is that if they can put the pole in. If they could put these cameras in on existing poles and they don't have to use a pole at all, so if they went around the village and surveyed it, and we gave them 12 intersections or 12 entrance and exit ways, if they could put the cameras on existing poles that have power, it would be about $8,745. If they have to install a new pole and bring power to that pole, it's going to run about $11,305. They don't. The thing is, for example, they might have electric on the streetlights. Would the village want those devices on there? ComEd does not. Okay, so if you have a ComEd pole, they've already told us that ComEd is very much against hooking up those cameras to their existing wood poles. So they've said in communities they have some that they do all on existing poles because the village or city will allow them to be affixed there. Others think it looks ugly on their current poles, so they don't allow that to happen. So it is always going to be more money, they told us, if you have to put in the freestanding pole and bring power to that location.
and the one-time video management system fee, the $3,381, that's regardless of how many cameras.
Yes, so that system will hold 150 cameras. So for that one amount would be the recording system, the data system, and the storage system that we would have to purchase with the system.
Do you know how many entryways there are into the village?
David, we counted how many? 16 major ones that we considered. Now, that would be, like Berry Point and Forest and 31st and First and all the ones that come up from Harlem, because anybody can enter the village from that end. I don't know how many total entranceways there are to the village if you take in every single street and alley, but we counted 16 at least that would be considered to be major. And they would said that they would be catching outgoing. There'd be no reason to take this pole and face it down Berry Point Road into Lyons. You'd want to install it so it's facing Berry Point Road towards the Presbyterian Church, for example, because you want to get the cars as they exit. I mean, they could put other cameras on to get them as they go away, but they're like, why would you want extra money? If you can catch them from the front, why would you do that?
How, the wireless system on this, how far is the transmission? Is it 5 miles or?
Well, when they came out and looked around the village and took those pictures in it, they said that they would have no problem making the wireless system work here. They didn't give me the mile part, but the way the village is laid out, they didn't think that they would have any issues. The issues is the pole, they have to have them up high.
Right.
They can't have them ground level or too low because it just won't happen here.
The reason for my question is if you can have 150 cameras on the system, I would assume the more cameras you purchase, the lower the prices would come down. This could be a project that we invite Lyons into, or Brookfield, or our neighboring communities, and kind of cooperate them all together.
Yeah, I would say that the more cameras you get, I would believe that the price would come down. I would agree with you. They told the reason I picked 150 is because they said the management system will handle 150 cameras.
So to cover the 16 major spots would be roughly $180,000.
Yes.
So my suggestion would be to put this further discussion on our CIP as we move forward, and then we can take.
If there's any other questions the board would like me to get before the CIP, you can either email me or call me, and we'll recontact the vendor, and we will ask them if there's any other, if they need anything else clarified. I'll have that ready for the CIP budget for you.
Well, thank you, Chief.
President Fields, I just wanted to thank Chief Weitzel and the Police Department for preparing the report. I think it was well done. I have some experience working with a police department that uses this system, and it's been a fantastic tool for crime investigation, and it's led to quite a few solved burglaries and hit and runs and things like this. So I strongly support the idea of doing this, whether we implement it all in 1 year or if we phase it in over 3, 4, 5 years, whatever we can afford to do. I definitely want to see us go forward with this.
You also had experience with this vendor, right?
Yes.
Marty, you need to come up to the podium, please.
Hello, I'm Marty Megan. I am chair of the Safe Environment Commission, and I just have heard some of the presentation by Chief Weitzel regarding cameras. I am currently a member of the Public-Private Task Force with the City of Chicago Office of Emergency Management and Communications. So, Trustee Ballerine, your idea, you're talking about a partnership with businesses. This is exactly what I think is beneficial for any community as well. So I support, as a community member, as a person in the Safe Environment Commission, I do want to support that. The other thing I want to talk about is that I can assist the village in developing some of that type of language, that those documents, agreements with businesses. We've got that again with the City of Chicago through Operation Virtual Shield. So that's something, again, I can partner with you on. And last but not least, there was conversation as to how long were recordings being kept. The police department may be keeping them 90 days. Most businesses, I would say, keep them about 30 to 60 max. But nevertheless, it's very beneficial. The other thing I can attest to is this. In the City of Chicago, we have a fabulous relationship with the police, as well as specifically even with the CTA security. And they have upgraded all of their camera video systems. The arrests have been phenomenal. So, and this is the commander of that, or the director of security for CTA, he's an old school type of commander who, it took him a while to really think about and appreciate the value of cameras. He is absolutely an advocate, as I am too, being a director of security at a large college downtown. So I can truly attest to the value of it. I'm very supportive of Chief Weitzel's efforts, and I would like to partner with, obviously, the trustees here in whatever measure we can move forward on this. And again, our commission will be of support.
Thank you, Marty. Any further comments? Okay, moving on to ordinances and resolutions. Our village attorney has suggested that we actually reverse the order of A and B. So first up will be a consideration of an ordinance amending various sections of the Village of Riverside zoning ordinance relative to variation, effective dates, and fence height. Are you going to present that, or Ms. Apt, our Community Development Director, is going to present these?
Based on some variation requests that were brought before the Planning and Zoning Commission about 2 months ago, staff prepared 2 text amendments to the zoning ordinance for the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider. The first one was to the section on the effective period for granted variations, and the other was to the maximum fence and wall height. Currently, our effective period states that no order granting a variation shall be valid for a period longer than 180 days from the date of approval unless a building permit is obtained and the erection or alteration of the building is started within such period. Staff proposed to extend the length of the effective period as well as the extension period that is mentioned in there to a period of 365 days. In addition, we recommended removing the Planning and Zoning Commission review prior to Village Board approval of such request for an extension. For the maximum fence height, staff brought before them 2 options. One was to allow a 4-foot fence for 40 feet from the front building line, or to the rear of the house, whichever is less. Currently, fences have a height maximum of 4 feet for 40 feet from the front building line, regardless of where the end of your house is. So staff proposed, one, to solve somewhat of that inequity problem that the Plan Commission recognized at a public hearing, so that a house that is less than 40 feet could begin a taller fence at the rear corner of their house. So that was option A that staff proposed to them. The other was option B that would remove the setback restriction altogether and just allow a maximum 6-foot tall fence behind your front building line. Staff prepared the public notice. That was published in the paper. They held the public hearing last month on the 23rd. After much consideration, the Planning and Zoning Commission did recommend approval of the extension of the effective period to 365 days for both the original effective period and the request for the extension. And they recommended approval of the option to maintain the 4-foot maximum height, but allow it to be 40 feet or the rear of the house, whichever is less. They did add a restriction on there that would not allow any fence that connects the house to the side property line, so it would be parallel with the house, to exceed 4 feet in height, regardless of whether it was 40 feet or not. So if it's connecting the house to the side property line, therefore visible from the street, it would be restricted to 4 feet in height. So that was the Planning and Zoning Commission's recommendation. You have an ordinance that would amend the text per those recommendations before you to consider.
So I would ask for a motion to approve an ordinance that it would amend the text of the Village of Riverside zoning ordinance sections 10.222G and 10.73F3 regarding effective period for variations in fence and wall height.
I would make a motion to approve the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Pollack, second by Ms. Hamilton. Discussion now?
When I was at the, can we talk about fences first?
Certainly.
When I was at the ZBA, listening to the discussion, you know, they were, the idea of this 40-foot was somewhat arbitrary. So they, you know, they talked about in length about, you know, coming all the way to the front of the property. And I think that's what they were getting to the front of the building line. And then Trustee Pollack mentioned that, you know, if there is a house with its main entrance on the side of a house, that it would be unsightly to then walk into a 5 or 6 foot fence.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that scaled them back to the back of the property line. What I would like to think we could do is allow the fence height from the front of the property line and or the rear of the main entrance of the home of either the house or of the petitioner or the joining house. Do you see what I'm saying?
Well, you're throwing out property line there, and so that's kind of throwing me. Do you want to start allowing fences in the front yards? Or are you saying the building line?
Building line, I'm
Okay.
sorry. Front of the building line.
Just wanted to clarify.
So we're not moving the fence up any farther forward.
Okay.
We're just raising the height of the fence, allowable height of the fence to the front of the building line.
Mm-hmm.
If both homes, except in the fact that if the main entrance to the
Is on the side.
Is on the side, then it would either be the front of the home or the rear of the main entrance of the home, unless mutually agreed upon by the two homeowners, and in that case, the variance would only live for the life of that one fence, because you don't know if someone's going to sell
That
the
would
house.
continue.
I think that would be an easy. I think that solves a lot of the problems that we have. I mean, I drive around town. And you know, there's these fences that start and then go up, and you know, there's, you know, the petitioner, when you go to his property, it's a very, very tight property, and I think he has a justifiable reason for wanting that fence, both because of the dogs or whatever, and you know, he's coming to us to improve his property. I mean, the fence that's there is a ratty old metal fence that's hanging halfway over his property, and he's prepared to, you know, take it down and spend $3,000 to fix it, and we're putting him through all kinds of crap to do that. So I think that part of Riverside.
Mr. Trustee, we're going to be talking about that particular variation after we deal with this language issue first.
But the language is, if I can change the language, then the variance doesn't have to be a problem anymore. Because if you will allow the language to read as I propose, then he would no longer need a variance.
So there was something you said that I didn't understand, though. You said if the two homeowners agree.
If the main entrance of the home is on the side of the house, and homeowner A wants to put a fence up to the front of his house line, and homeowner B, which is the next door neighbor, agrees, then the fence can come to the front of the property, or the front of the house line. If homeowner B disagrees, then it has to be to the rear of his door.
So what if homeowner B agrees and then homeowner B sells his house to homeowner C and then homeowner C doesn't?
That's why the variation would only last the life of the fence. So,
but that's not what, because the fence could still be there if homeowner B sold his house.
Correct, but
So
homeowner C would see that when he bought the house.
So they wouldn't have the ability to come in and say now.
No, you can't. You know, but if homeowner A wanted to replace that house, homeowner C then could say no, because the variation would only last as long as.
But you would still require them to go through the variation process for that?
The second time, if they wanted to put it up a second time, yes.
I'm asking our attorney to opine on that.
Yeah, the idea of I guess the zoning, it's not really relief because you're changing the text, but zoning decisions that are subject to side agreements by neighbors, I think, are somewhat problematic. I don't have a lot of experience with it, so I could give it some thought, but, you know, the idea that you have requirements for zoning that change if your neighbor says it's okay.
Okay, well, then I wouldn't have a problem saying that it would, the fence would start either at the front of the house or the rear of the main entrance.
And that option was discussed. That was one of the options I gave them, that we would eliminate the height restriction altogether. And you would be allowed to have a maximum 6-foot height fence from the front of your home
all the way back,
all the way to the back of your property. Obviously, no fences still would be allowed in the front yard,
right,
but starting from the face of your home, going to the rear of your property, one of the options I said was, let's get rid of that 4-foot restriction and just allow maximum 6-foot fence altogether.
But
there was very little support of that by the Planning and Zoning Commission, so it's unfair to say it seemed like they were okay with. There were not many that were okay with that. So I don't know if that was not clear in my minutes, but that was not the message I was getting from the commissioners. A few were okay with a 6-foot fence coming up to the front of the house, but not many. So I wasn't necessarily a close call.
I was at the same meeting. And
This was for the public hearing on the text amendment.
Right,
Okay.
I was there.
Okay.
I think they were more caught up with the front of the fence when Commissioner Sterner showed the picture with the lady in front of the fence and stuff like that.
Nobody liked the front fence going across being 6 feet.
I would be with that. I just think it makes sense to allow them to have the fence to the front of their house and or the rear of the main entrance of the house. That's my thought. I can't say it any other way.
So, but the commission was 6-1, wanting to keep the 4-foot height. Is that
Keep the
correct?
4-foot height, but allow it to begin at the rear of the house.
Right, okay.
If the house was less than 40 feet deep, so it's
To allow it to go to 6 feet once it gets to the rear of the house, is that?
Exactly.
Okay, so 4 feet up until the rear of the house and then 6 feet.
Or the 40 feet, whichever is less. So if somebody has a deeper house, that's 50 feet wide, then they could start to go up to the 6 feet at the 40-foot mark.
So as an example, the gentleman that came before us had a 28-foot long house, and so he'd be able to start the fence at the 28-foot rather than the 40.
So maybe just on a parliamentary point here, maybe we should discuss the section 222G with regard to the 180-day extension. Can we talk about that one and vote on that one first? Sure. And then move to the fence one? So we'll separate the motion. So what are your thoughts with regard to the 100, changing the 180 to 365?
I have no problem with that, because I know that sometimes people get caught up in these decision-making, and so it would sometimes take longer than the 180, so yeah, I agree with that.
Does anyone have?
I fully support it. It's standard in the industry, so to speak. So I see no problem. Now, we should understand 365, the original 1 year to get your permit and start construction is by code. The second, if you need more time, it's at the discretion of the village board. So we don't have to allow a full second year. But if someone comes to us with a good reason, then we can allow up to 1 year. So I support that.
So hearing no problem with that. So hearing no further discussion, let's call the roll with regard to section 10.222G. Well, we already had the original motion. They combine both of them. Can we just bifurcate it? Or?
Yeah, we can, but we should create a second motion, because we changed sort of the question.
All right, so I'd ask for a motion in a second to approve an ordinance that would amend the text of the Village of Riverside zoning ordinance, section 10.222G.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Pollack, second by Mr. Ballerine. And now you may call the roll, please.
Trustee Hamilton. Aye. Trustee Pollack.
Aye.
Trustee Ballerine.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Foley.
So that motion carries. So now we're back to the fence question. Further discussion? Collins?
I appreciate Trustee Ballery's suggestions, but I see some problems with trying to do that. You know, the aspect of an agreement. One guy.
We'll forget about that.
Okay.
Forget
Good.
about that. We'll make it either the front of the building or the rear of the main entrance of the home.
But even that one, I could see some difficulties administering that. You know, I look at these things as Sonia does. How do you administer that code? And I mean, I've got a house next door to me where they've got a front door and a front door. You know, if I'm that resident, the side door, what architecturally looks like the side door is really his front door. That's the door he uses. But he's got a front door too. So now staff has to decide which one's the front door. Is it the architectural front door or is it the door they use the most? And now you're putting staff in a really awkward being a judge rather than an administrator.
I would assume it would be the architectural front door.
Well, and if that's the case, I would have a problem with that. Because if I lived in this particular house that I'm thinking of, I would not want a fence 5 feet from that side door that I use as for my main entryway. And that's just one example. I mean, I'm sure, you know, we've got as many different types of houses as there are houses in this town. And so everyone, I mean, I can imagine the unintended consequences of that type of regulation just being very difficult. So, I appreciate, you know, what you're trying to do. It gets to the intent of keeping the taller fences back away from someone's door. But I see that as being very practical to achieve, or very difficult to achieve. I'm comfortable with what the Plan Commission recommended. You know, I kind of come at this with a little bit of a bias against fences in side yards altogether. You know, I think if I were starting a village from scratch, I wouldn't allow fences in side yards at all. But we allow 4-foot fences. I don't want to turn back the hands of time and create nonconformity, so I'm okay with what the Plan Commission recommended.
Well, I, for one, am still not completely clear on what the Plan Commission recommended. So if you can explain, because it sounds like originally they said option A would allow a 6-foot fence to begin at either 40 feet from the front or the rear of the house, but then they amended it to say no higher than 4 feet if it's facing the street. So what was their specific recommendation?
Their specific recommendation was to allow fences with a maximum height of 4 feet in the side yard for 40 feet or to the rear of the house, whichever is less. So, in instance where, as a variation you will see shortly on this evening, his house is only 28 feet deep. Currently, our code reads that you cannot have a fence that is taller than 4 feet in height within 40 feet of your front building line. With this amendment, he would be allowed to start it at the rear of his house, even though it's only 28 feet, because we're changing, they're recommending the change that it be 40 feet or the rear of your home, whichever is less. So the 28 feet is less. They added something that staff had not brought up and had not proposed before them, but Attorney Mars added that into the language. In addition, they wanted the restriction that that fence that is parallel with the street, connecting the house to the side property line, cannot be taller than 4 feet, regardless of whether it's behind that 40-foot line. So if it's at the rear corner of the house, facing the street, coming to your side property line, so it's parallel with the street, that fence can never be taller than, that portion of the fence can never be taller than 4 feet.
So with regard to that specific proposal, what are your thoughts on that specific proposal, Mr.?
I like it. I don't want to see 6-foot fences coming all the way to the front line of somebody's home because of the setbacks, the front setbacks of the way this village is put together and how they're all varied up and down the street.
Right.
your sight line from the front looking down the block, you'd be just 6-foot fence, 6-foot fence, 6-foot fence. I agree that I like the fact that you can jump to a 6-foot fence at the back of the building line. I do agree on a 4-foot fence coming down between homes if it has to, and absolutely only a 4-foot fence coming across the front, parallel to the house. That's what I'd like.
I was just going to say, so the 4-foot going across then would meet a 6-foot going back, right?
If it's behind that, if it's at the rear corner of the house or at that 40-foot mark. Right.
No, I could jump right up.
Just be.
However they aesthetically choose to do that. Yeah, they can just, you can have the two different heights.
Like a gate.
Yeah. Okay.
It doesn't necessarily always turn out to be the most aesthetically pleasing, but fence companies can figure out how to make that nice swoop up to the 5 or 6 foot mark.
And then, I'm just looking at the picture here of the two houses. So the chain link fence that's there right now is not a conformity, I take it.
Oh, for the 187? It is currently taller than 4 feet, so it is currently.
Well, it also comes to the front of the house, it looks like.
It's allowed to come to the front.
Yeah.
Oh, it is, as long as it's
4
less than
feet.
4 feet?
But it's taller than, it's technically taller than 4 feet.
I did want to clarify one thing. The only thing I was a little bit hesitant about from what the Planning Commission recommended was that they are, the 40-foot versus the back of the house. I see that kind of as just a clarification or correction of something that was a little bit arbitrary maybe. But they did, and I want to make sure everyone understands this, they did recommend that, the part of the fence is parallel to the street, even if it's 10 feet behind the house or 50 feet behind the house, wherever it is, anything parallel to the street can only be 4 feet tall. So you're going to have, your back of your house here, you have 4 feet here and then 6 feet.
No, it's anything connecting the house to the side.
Okay, so
the rear yard line,
that's fine.
Okay,
If it's connecting the house to the side property.
it's only where
From the street, Doug.
structure.
From
Yeah.
the street. What you see from
but
the
even
street.
right, but even if it's at the back of the house,
Right.
we're
Even if it's at the
saying-
back.
The Planning Commission is saying that has to be 4 feet. So you're going to have a 4-foot fence, and then when it turns, it's going to be 6 foot.
Right. Is that different than what it is now?
Yes.
Yes. Currently, if somebody's rear of their house is at that 40-foot mark or more, they can come off of that rear corner of the house currently with a 6-foot fence. We do not have that restriction. If it's behind that 40-foot mark, they can have a 6-foot fence, regardless of whether it's parallel with the street or not.
Okay, and you have to remember, there are some very, very nice fences, and there's a few in this town that are at the back of the property that are concrete pillars on each side of the driveway. And there's a very nice iron fence that's over 4 feet, which would look stupid if it was low. Well, I shouldn't say stupid, I didn't mean that, but would not look proportionately proper to the decorative of the fence as it does now. So it's not all big cedar hunked, quiet,
No, I understand that.
So that's the other thing we have to think about, because there's some beautiful fences in town that show that.
Well, I still want to make sure I'm trying to understand. Okay, so you have the house, and at the 28 feet or 40 feet, whichever is less, the part that's connected to the house would have to be 4 feet.
So here's the back of the house. This part here, coming across, here's the street. This can always only be 4 feet in
Okay,
height.
and I got that part. And then going back, it can be 6. And then after it turns, it can still be 6.
Here it can still be 6. Yeah.
It would only be where it's connected by structure.
You got it.
Okay, so I personally don't like that, because if I have a dog that can jump a 4-foot fence, that negates that possibility for me of fencing in my backyard.
Yeah, because then you'd have to bring something back this way and then connect it.
So I think what I hear, though, is that just the conceptual part about 28 or around 40 or the back of the house, whichever is less, there's agreement about that part. So the real question is, the part that faces the street, are we going to allow that to be 6 feet? That's really the issue. Am I right? That's the
Correct.
issue? So what do you think about that?
No.
No what?
I don't want.
6 feet or 4 feet?
4 feet or 6 feet?
4 feet. 4 feet.
Because currently it is permitted. If this is 40 feet, they can have currently a 6-foot fence that connects the rear of their house to the side property line. That is currently permitted if it's 40 feet back or more.
Yeah, I like the current one, I don't like the change.
I agree.
I agree, 6 feet.
So even if it's less than 40 feet, you're saying?
Yeah, as long as it's the back of the house.
Yeah, as long as it's the back of the house.
Right, wherever you can start.
I agree. I think it should be uniform with what's permitted now.
Okay, so are we clear then? Because that would be the motion or the change. We're basically accepting option A, except that we are going
Accept the addition.
we're going to reject the part about the 4 feet.
Okay.
Are we clear on what we're voting on here? Are we okay motion-wise?
We need to have one.
Okay, so let's.
So we need a motion and a second.
So let's have a motion to approve an ordinance that would amend the text of the Village of Riverside zoning ordinance, section 1073F3, regarding the fence and wall height.
And it would accept the plan, would accept the recommendation as it relates to the setback requirement, but not the parallel to the right-of-way
Parallel height.
being required.
Additional restriction.
Okay, okay, a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Pollak, second by Mr. Vallerine. Please call the roll.
Trustee Hamilton.
Aye.
Trustee Pollak.
Aye.
Trustee Vallerine.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Foley.
Aye.
Motion carries. So now we will move back to the original number A, consideration of findings and recommendation of the Planning and Zoning Commission, request for a fence variation at 187 West Burlington. Zach?
All righty. The petitioner is here. He submitted a request for a variation from the fence and wall height section that you just proposed amendment for. He is seeking relief from the 4-foot height requirement for the 40-foot measurement from the front building line to the rear of the property in order to install a 5-foot tall fence. So he wants to start a 5-foot tall fence at the front, at his front building line, and extend it all the way to the rear property line. And that's at 187 West Burlington. We held the public hearing back in June. We did all the required postings and everything. The Plan and Zoning Commission, however, did not find a undue hardship for the property and therefore recommend denial of his petition for a variation. But out of that discussion did come amending that 40-foot rule. So he would still require the variation despite your change, because in that side yard for the entire length of his house, he does want a 5-foot fence. So even with the amendment, his variation still stands because he still wants that 5-foot fence to be able to come up to the front corner of his house. So he's here to answer any questions that you have.
So even though we just approved a 6-foot fence, he needs a variation to have a 5-foot fence?
Yes, because he wants to come to the front of his house. He doesn't want to start at the rear corner. He wants to bring the fence all the way to his front building
to
line
the
that's
front.
5 feet in height. And we are only allowing a 4-foot height for that section. You can't go up to 6 feet till you get to the rear of your house.
I see. Got it. I think.
So think of it this way, before the text amendment, he couldn't have started as 5 feet until 12 feet past the back of his house. Now he can start at the back of his house. But he wants to start at the front of his house.
Okay.
So you can start at 12 feet earlier than you could before the text amendment, but not as far as.
So under the one that we just passed, he could start at the back of his house at 5 feet and go all the way around without any problem.
Correct.
So, or up to 6, but the issue is he wants to start at the front of his house. Okay. So, well, do we need should we do a motion first, or?
Well, it would be appropriate, I think,
to have the
if he
petition.
has any comments.
Sir, would
if
you
he
like
wants
to address the board?
I apologize, I had a bad head day, so I got to wear a hat. Mr.
That hat is
President,
fine.
the board members and distinguished guests. And I'm not used to talking in front of people, but I'll do the best I can and explain this whole situation. First of all, on March 18th of this year, a village official who worked and was employed by the village okayed my 5-foot fence from the front of my house back, gave me permission to have a permit and go get my estimates and bring everything in. And on May 19th, that person said, you need a variance, handed me the variance sheet, and left the building, and he's no longer employed with the village. So I look at the village to uphold the integrity of the village, and if somebody shakes my hand and says, you can do this, I should be able to do that, and it shouldn't be reneged upon. But that's the front end. Now let me explain this whole story and what happened. I was having some issues with my neighbors, and I wanted to put a fence up to an existing fence. The code said if I can't put the fence to a close proximity of the lot line, then it must be 3 feet away. Since the fence was in such disarray, it was actually bent over into my property like 18 inches. So I couldn't do that fence. So I contacted the village, and Karen Byrne came out. And she looked over the fence, and I have a letter that they actually gave, if you want to see that. She actually said that the fence was in disarray and had to be either brought up to code, removed, or replaced. The neighbors did not do that. So I contacted Karen Burns again, and she came out and said, look, I guess we can take these people to court. I don't know what the judge is going to say, but we can do that. I said, hold off. Let me see if I can make amends with my neighbors and come up with some kind of proposal. Well, we came up with a proposal of, and you got to understand, and I'll explain the whole thing when I went to Bob and showed him the whole thing. That fence is a 4.5-foot fence. The topology to my house, the whole street has 10 houses, drops 2 to 3 feet. So there's a topology issue. There's an issue that the existing fence was 4.5 feet. The village has grandfathering clauses for a lot of different things, but not fences. They also, in the fence code, don't show topology. So my house is from 2 to 6 inch lower for the foundation than my neighbors. So if I was to put a 4-foot fence in there, they'd have about 3.5 feet. Their dogs would just visit the neighborhood every day. So I knew that I needed at least what's there, and you know, I was going to add 6 inches because of my topology. I talked to the neighbors. They agreed to give a letter that I would tear the fence down at my expense and put in a brand new fence, which is about $3,000, so that we could have conformity and proximity. We didn't have a safety issue. Also privacy issue, because I couldn't put a fence behind my house, right? Because the code said 4 feet, they had no privacy. And also the code discriminated against me that didn't discriminate against other neighbors. My other neighbor, and I don't know if you saw the pictures, they have a 6-foot fence at the back of their house because their house was 40 feet deep. I couldn't do that. Now, you did vote tonight that I can do a fence at the back of the house. My neighbors have a side entrance that they use as their main entrance. Their driveway is 8.5 foot wide. My bedroom side to the fence is 4 feet, so it's less than 12 feet. So we said, hey, we'll do the 5-foot fence from the front and around. And I brought all that up to Bob, and he said, yeah, I see what you mean in proximity and also the topology. You're approved for a 5-foot fence. That was the original thing. So, and what I would do is I'd do the 5-foot fence solid and a good, not junk. It was going to be a solid cedar, beautiful, traditional fence, no junk. It would enhance the neighborhood, it would enhance it, and a good fence makes good neighbors. So the other thing, when I went to get the variance, the village originally told me that they have a special thing for fences and it's $250. Well, that turned out to be wrong. It's still a regular variance with $500. And I said, that's okay. So I would not be spending this money and going through this whole process if I really felt like it was a necessity to do this. Because, you know, if it's 3.5 feet to the neighbor's going to take off with their dogs, you know. So anyway, I paid the $500. The board this is the zoning board, didn't feel like I had a hardship for proximity, for safety, because, you know, you got little kids running around and it's a cyclone fence and they're guard dogs. I was afraid the kids were going to stick their hand through the fence and give the peanut butter sandwich to the dog. Well, I don't know if they're going to eat the hand or the sandwich. So there was a safety issue. They didn't say that that was okay. The other issue, privacy. I couldn't have any privacy in my backyard. And I went, that's a hardship for sure, but they didn't feel that was hardship. Plus the code discriminated against me, that wasn't hardship. So they voted me not to have a variance, or recommend not a variance. And I respect them, but I disagree with their ruling. You know, I hope I can say that to you all. So in closing, I'd just like to say I hope you'll uphold the integrity of the village, and I've shaken people's hands for years and made deals, and you get the paperwork later, and all of a sudden the village doesn't honor my permit. The 40-foot rule, nobody could tell me when it was ever made. I think it's very ambiguous. I mean, you know, I know they change it a little lot, but I think the whole thing's ambiguous. Because if you have a house next to you with a main entrance, right, that's different than having a house with a main entrance at the back or the front. I could see the village saying, look, you can't have a fence except from the back of your house unless you have a side entrance, then you can go to the front of your house. I think that's fair. I'm not necessarily 100% in favor of 6 feet. I was just asking for this much more on the top of an existing fence. You know, that was in disarray. And I had a topology issue. So even though I'm asking for that much more, my fence would probably equal the old fence. So that's my issue. And the 4.5 feet no grandfathering. And I could have built a 1-foot berm, and that's the other issue. There's nothing in the fence code that says where that fence has to start from the ground. So in actuality, I could have put a 1-foot berm on the side of my house by the property line and built a 4-foot fence on top, and I would have 5 feet. But I'm an honest guy. I try to follow all the rules of the village, and I get a permit whenever I should get a permit. So I'm hoping that, and the fence is condemned, so if I don't get a permit, then they're going to probably have to go into court and get this guy to remove his fence.
Ms. Ross, the I'm still not clear on that. Is why do you want to start it from the front of your house?
Because that's where the existing fence is now, and their gate. It's not my gate, it's their gate. They have a gate at the front of their house and a 4.5-foot fence that goes back. So they would leave their gate. They would leave their gate across their driveway.
Neighbors own the fence.
They would leave their gate across their driveway, and then I would have a cedar fence all the way back. And it's a proximity, and I don't think Mr. Olmsted ever designed west of First Avenue. You know, and we all have, and be honest, we all have 100 by 50-foot lots. And under the new village code of 30% per lot, you can only put 1,500 square feet on a lot over there. Well, all the lots are non-conforming. So I'm just saying, you know, give me some consideration west of First Avenue.
You don't even have sidewalks.
Huh?
You don't even have sidewalks over there, don't you?
Well, I have no sidewalks on my street. We've actually got signs now with flags on them to ask people to drive slowly down the street because the kids only have the street to play in.
Just think how much money we save not having to replace your sidewalks.
Right. So, you know, I'm just saying, ultimately, I hope you uphold the dignity of Riverside and the deals they make with their residents and give me my permit. I have one person. I was going to bring 500 vets, but... And by the way, I'm a 50-year-plus resident of Riverside and 30 years at my current residence and a 6-year Army guy. Go ahead. Hi.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Javors. I live at 16 North Forbes, which is 4 or 5 houses from Tony's. I think his proposal is something that you should consider and approve, because it'll just improve our neighborhood, which is the poor stepchild of Riverside. Thank you.
I would make a motion that we approve this variance. If that's what I need to do.
So there's a motion. Do I hear a second?
We'll second it, Joe.
Second by Ms. Hamilton.
And
Ms.
now,
Abt?
part of the reason I think when a lot of these codes and a lot of these ordinances were developed, they weren't developed with that side of Riverside in mind. I mean, if you look at your packet or if you visited this gentleman's home, these houses are tight, and they're small and they're tight and they're lined straight up. You know, you look at a map of Riverside, of this side of First Avenue. I don't mean to think that you're not Riverside, but on this side of First Avenue, the houses are much different. There's a lot more side yard. There's more sweeping. It's a different layout. So I think in his particular case, I mean, the dogs that are next door are not normal dogs. They're guard dogs, and it's stated clearly that they're guard dogs. When I went to his side yard with him, one almost jumped through the window. Yeah. And the window was this high, and I saw from chest up of this dog. So the 4-foot fence would do him no good.
Anybody wants to see the picture?
It's in the area. They have it.
I mean, a area.
Yeah, they have it.
We've got it.
Okay.
So I think in this case, this gentleman's proposal is unique. I think he'll definitely be a betterment for the neighborhood, for himself, for his neighbor. So I think it's a worthwhile variance.
Yeah, and I have one more word. I looked at all the village's ordinances because I wanted to just not be prepared tonight when I first asked for it. So right now, I consider myself a fence code topologist. So if you need any help in the future, I'd be more than happy to rewrite the code here. But I respectfully just say, when I shake somebody's hand and I be an approval, and then later on they renege it, I don't think the village wants that to happen. I think integrity, and my town has integrity, and I love my town, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. Ms. Abt? So I just want to make sure I understand what the commission did. So they were unanimous in denying, and that was because they felt that the undue hardship had not been met?
Right. The other two, they felt you could make a case for, but they did not find that there was an undue hardship.
So my question for you, Mr. Ballerine, is what's the undue hardship?
I think I remember one zoning commissioner say that according to the definition, just being gentlemanly, by not being gentlemanly is undue hardship. I mean, I think it's very vague, and whether it's guard dogs or whether it's the topography of his land, I think as a board we're given latitude to take these cases one by one and try to make the best decision for a village. And I think the zoning board did a very, very good job in understanding and making a ruling on the very strict definition of the law. But all of our boards and all of our commissions are they're tasked for one objective. And for example, the recreation board can come to this board and say, we vote unanimously to put in a playground in the first division, and we want to put it in Scottswood Common. So this board has to then decide what other circumstances are surrounding this recommendation that is at the right or wrong place for a park. So I'm not, what I'm trying to say is I know that there is a feeling that when a commission or a board sends us something that, we should follow it all the time, and I think they're advisory, and I think we should follow it. But I think as board members, as trustees, as elected officials, we have to be more encompassing in our thought. And as I look at this gentleman's property and the topography of the land, the fence that he already has, I think it's worthwhile to give him his variance.
I agree with I support the zoning commission's decision and think that, I agree with them that it's not a hardship. I mean, it's an unfortunate situation, but it doesn't meet the hardship definition. I, however, have a problem with if he was told by someone here that it would be approved, for him then to be told that it's not approved. And I have a problem with that personally. So if it's true that he was told it was approved, then I feel that we need to stand by our word.
So you were physically issued a permit?
No, I was verbally told I would get a permit from Bob Carrera.
Okay.
And on March 18th, I have it here, and I thought he was going to log it into the system. He told me to go, in fact, I have estimates exactly for what I was going to do. I brought it all to him on May.
You have nothing other than his
Other
word
than a
and
verbal,
action?
he never, as far as I know, he never put anything in my folder in the village. The only thing I can tell you is I have my integrity and honesty as a resident in Riverside.
I'm not questioning that, sir.
Okay. And I would never say that to this board if it wasn't true. And I could never question Bob after that day because he left.
Sure.
So I could never understand why he did what he did.
To get to your point about raising it and putting your fence on a berm, which is something you can't do. You can't.
Well,
You can't build a berm because then you'd be shedding water into your neighbor's yard, which is
I'm just
against
saying,
the code.
I'm saying nicely, a lot of people would have read the code and would put the fence in. And I'm not. I'm trying to be a true person, get a permit, do the proper thing.
So how do you plan on erecting this fence if your neighbor's fence is in such disarray?
No. The deal with my neighbor is, and they were going to sign a letter with me.
So
They were gonna be
that I would
co-permitters to remove the
pay to
existing
tear their
fence.
fence down and put a new fence in. But the only thing that would be left is their gate at the back and their gate in the front.
And that
Otherwise,
fence-
I'd have a cedar fence. So I was going to pay to actually have a neighbor's fence torn down and a brand-new cedar fence put in for about $3,000. A good fence makes good neighbors.
So if I'm looking at the photographs and listening to what you're saying, the real purpose of starting the fence at the front of your house is really to benefit your neighbor.
That neighbor already has one there.
Right, so that they can let their dogs out the side of the house.
Yes. Our agreement was I'd replace their whole fence with a cedar fence. If it was me,
I think
I don't need a fence on the side of the house, but I do because of my neighbors. That's the agreement.
But
the point for the fence on the side is what you had stated to the zoning board is your bedroom window is on that side of that driveway.
Yeah, oh,
and
absolutely.
the fence would provide some
A
privacy.
little bit of
for-
noise and stuff like that. The whole fencing issue is going to help. It's going to help, period.
Further discussion,
And like I said, I'm not asking for 4 foot to 5 foot. I'm asking from 4.5 foot, a little bit higher because of the topography. So that's all I'm asking.
Further discussion with the trustees, Mr. Powell?
Thank you. I got a few points there, or questions, a couple of questions for the attorneys. Under our zoning ordinance, our decision on a variation, is it or is it not confined by the same requirements as the Planning and Zoning Commission's decision?
It's the same, the same requirements.
Right, so we can disagree with their opinion of whether it met the findings or not, but we can't go beyond those findings or those standards, correct?
The standards are identical, right.
So then I guess my second question is, and I know this is one that zoning boards and village boards struggle with all the time, what is a hardship? And you have to set aside Webster's, you have to set aside, your common understanding of what hardship is and understand that it's only defined by case law and by our zoning ordinances. And as I understand it, and as where I'd like the village attorney to confirm or not, a hardship for zoning variation purposes is a hardship that results directly from some unique physical condition to the property, not the personal circumstances of the property owner or the neighbor, but results directly from a physical condition of the property that creates a hardship because it prevents the property owner from making reasonable use of their property. Is that a fair way to describe hardship?
That's a fair way of the traditional understanding of hardship. I would expand it a little further in current thinking by boards to include a sort of policy consideration that where somebody is preserving an existing house and perhaps needs an addition, and in order to maintain the architectural integrity of what was there, they may need a variation. Or another area where I see some flexibility that I think is justifiable is where you have mature trees that are being saved. And I think the policy considerations there can be justified because what you're basically saying there is that we as a community think of the existing housing stock and maintaining its integrity and avoiding unnecessary teardowns just to get strict compliance as the structures are part of the lot now. We want them to stay if they can. So it's like having a creek running through your property, if I might. And we also think of trees differently than I think we did 60 or 70 years ago, where they were considered completely expendable. But they still, I think, meet with what you were saying, Trustee Pollack, in the sense that those things, even if you do expand your hardship to include them, still are tied to the land. There's a strict constructionist could say they're not. They're expendable, the land is the land, but I think there is a bit of give there. But I do think that it's very difficult to jive anything of hardship in a zoning context with the personal occupants or the personal attributes of their lifestyle or things like that.
How about if it was if someone had a disability and needed a ramp built or something, and they made variance because that's not allowed to be built in the front yard?
Right. That raises other areas that dealing with disabilities, and there are specific leeways given to actually required to consider reasonable accommodation of zoning codes, which include variances in order to accommodate disabilities. So there's some leeway there.
Right, so I think I appreciate the clarification, and I think what you just said is 100% consistent with what I said. The house is a physical condition to the property. The trees are a physical condition to the property. If they're in the way, then yes, a variation can be justified. Likewise, with a person with a disability, the variation is not because of the personal circumstance of that person living in the house. It's because every house should be able to accommodate a disabled person. And if physically the property cannot accommodate a ramp, then that's a physical condition of the property. It's not because that person at that time happens to be disabled. So it's still a physical condition of the property. The other thing I wanted to have the village attorney weigh in on and also offer my opinion is I very much appreciate what Trustee Collins said, what the petitioner said about a promise that apparently was made, and it's extremely unfortunate, but I would caution the village board from basing zoning decisions on such actions. I think that's a very dangerous road for the village to take, and if we set that kind of precedent of making zoning decisions because he said, she said type of things, we're going to have some serious troubles down the road. That's a precedent we don't want to create. It's unfortunate. I'm very sympathetic with the circumstances. I quite honestly tend not to doubt the petitioner's story on this, but it's not something, as much as I feel for you, sir, it's not something we, in my opinion, can take into consideration.
Can I ask one thing? When you were talking about the hardship, wouldn't you consider when you got a village code that's discriminatory against a property owner as not being a hardship?
Well, by definition, zoning is discriminatory always because it discriminates between different zoning districts and different properties, and And so I don't know what's unique about your situation that would be.
It was just a question.
No.
And just for a point of clarification from the attorneys, I mean, just to be clear, our building inspectors and our staff do not have the authority to grant variations. Only this board has the authority to grant variations.
But sir, I would have started a variation March 18th.
Right.
If somebody,
I'm not really saying this for your
but I'm
benefit,
saying I don't
I'm
know
saying
if-
that for the benefit of those who might be listening.
Right.
Those kind of assurances are not going to happen.
Well,
moving forward.
I mean, it happened.
But the staff does not have that authority. Only the village board has that authority.
But as a resident,
I understand.
I don't know that.
I understand. Well, that's hopefully now people.
Okay, so everybody knows that now, but so what I'm saying is I'm just asking you to do the
Sir,
right
we understand.
thing.
Let them talk about it.
Okay.
Mr. Foley?
I want to try and save you some money here. And I'm looking at this picture of this gentleman's property here, and I wish you could all see it at home. If you go to the website, you can probably see a picture of it in the packet. But if you were not to remove, and what would you have, why don't you just start the taller fence at the back of your house? By adding, you have a 4-foot fence outside your bedroom window now, and from the looks of it, your bedroom window is a good 5 or 6 feet above that fence anyways. Adding one more foot to that fence, it's not going to buy you a lot of bedroom privacy on that side. And you wouldn't have to tear down your neighbor's fence. You could just start a 5-foot fence at the back of your house and go across to his 4-foot fence, and then continue your 5-foot, remove that section of the fence and go all the way down the property, and only have to pay to remove half of your neighbor's fence.
Yeah, but that fence is like this.
Well, then,
I mean, if you physically went out there and looked at the fence, the picture.
then that's an issue, sir, that you should take up with your neighbor and tell him to get his fence off of your property and stand his fence up. That's not a variant. That's, I mean, that, to me, I would just ask my neighbor, could you stand your fence up?
But I already did that, and I already had the
All right,
village.
and if he argues and gives you a hard time about it, well then, I would opt in that instance to just start the fence halfway down the property and close off the back of my yard across the back of your house with a 5-foot section, and just live with the 4-foot piece that's underneath your bedroom window. I mean,
Yeah,
it would be
and I
a cheaper
hear what you're
alternative for you.
I hear what you're saying, and I'm just saying that I worked out an agreement with my neighbor, and the village approved it. And I'm sorry for saying that over and over, but
No.
but I really feel that there's an existing, and we're not talking a 4-foot fence now, we're talking a 4-foot and a half, we're talking a 4.5-foot fence. And I have pictures with the measurements.
Okay.
And a top out.
So your neighbor's got a dilapidated, non-compliant fence that's halfway falling down here.
Right. And there's no grandfathering in Riverside on 4.5-foot fences like there are on driveways and other things.
Mr. Powell, I'm sorry.
Well,
Were you done, Mr. Powell?
The issue is...
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the issue of the dilapidated fence can be addressed. I mean, the petitioner said that our code enforcement person looked at it and said
That's
that
what
it
I-
violated the property maintenance code, so we can...
He's allowed to repair his non-compliant fence. He doesn't have to replace it unless he
Well, no,
wants
the
to.
village said
He can't
to
replace it, but he can
repair.
Exactly, he can't
Yeah.
replace it in like kind. He would have to change the height to whatever we just decided on.
Yeah.
4 feet at that.
Right. So, I mean, I guess that's where I stand. I see friendly alternatives and cost-saving alternatives for you as a homeowner to rectify this problem without looking for a variance.
Further discussion? Michael, please.
Just 2 things before we get into a vote is, one, when we have a recommendation of denial from the Planning and Zoning Commission, we don't prepare an ordinance because you don't need an ordinance to agree with their denial. So technically your motion should be it would be to override the recommendation of denial. And if that's approved, then we would prepare an ordinance for the next meeting, approving this variation.
And while we're talking about it.
Right, the other thing I wanted to mention is state law requires when you have a recommendation of denial from the ZBA like we have here, it takes 2/3 favorable vote of all trustees to override that, which means the president wouldn't vote in any case, even if there's a tie, and that we need an affirmative vote from 4 of the 5 trustees present in order to override that recommendation.
It's one of those rare instances where the village president cannot vote. I mean, even in a tie, normally you think as long as you get 4 affirmative votes, but the statute is written in this way where it says 2/3 of the aldermen or trustees.
I was very happy that there are 5 trustees. Any further discussion before we call the question? So we understand from Mr. Mars that the motion on the floor is to override the recommendation of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Are we clear on that? Okay. Please call the roll.
Trustee Hamilton. Aye. Trustee Pollock.
No.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Collins. Aye. Trustee Foley.
No.
Okay. Motion fails. So, Mr. Moss, you can work with our director moving forward, and she can provide you assistance about planning your alternatives.
Do we need a motion on approving the ordinance?
No, this is dispositive. Yeah, this deals with the issue. You don't need to now vote again.
So how many people voted? 5?
Yes.
5 of the 5 trustees that are present, it was a 3-2 vote, so it did not get 2/3. It did not get the 4 that it needed.
I'll just make a statement. I'm just very disappointed that somebody approved my fence and you can't have the integrity to stand behind it.
Okay. Moving on, the next agenda item is considerations. You have before you a memorandum that, oh, I'm sorry, we got more on a resolution. Sorry, getting ahead of myself here. Next up is consideration of a resolution approving an extension of an effective period for previously approved variations 52 North Delaplane.
Keep it short. All righty. You've previously seen the variation for 52 North Delaplane. It was approved by Ordinance 2812. They are requesting an extension under the effective period that you just adopted a little while ago. You have a copy of their letter asking for that extension and the resolution before you. Their attorney is here and can make a statement if she so chooses, and ball's in your court.
So first I would ask language here for a motion to approve a resolution approving an extension of an effective period for previously approved variation for 52 North Delaplane. Motion by Mr. Valerie, second by Ms. Hamilton. So given our earlier discussion, do we need to hear a statement from the attorney, or are we good with?
It's consistent with what we just approved.
So there's a consensus.
Well, for the record, I think we should have in the minutes that there were unique circumstances here. They applied for the permit within 1 year, and because we had that 6-month deadline, they weren't able to proceed, and so it's based on those circumstances that I would support the request.
So it looks like you don't need to make a statement. So if there's no further discussion, you can call the roll.
Trustee Hamilton. Aye. Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie. Aye. Trustee Collins. Aye. Trustee Foley.
Aye. Motion carries.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're very persuasive.
Long wait.
Okay, so now moving on to the CMAP initiatives update. Our commissions have enjoyed quite a renaissance period here in the last year or so. There's been a new energy and a new direction by our commissions that I've personally been very pleased to see. And as we've moved along with the CMAP initiatives that this board passed, a lot of them have been accomplished, or a number of them have been accomplished. Some have been found to be unfeasible after further research. But we are now entering a phase of the actual kind of boots on the ground, getting the work done stage for these initiatives. And one of the things that is kind of a counterpart to the renewed activity with the commissions is that the good thing about our commission system is the amount of input that we get from our residents, and the talent and the expertise and the dedication. The bad thing about our commission system is, and Trustee Ballering referenced this earlier, is that sometimes they can become isolated. So one of the things that's come up as we've started trying to work through these initiatives is finding better ways to facilitate communication among our various commissions. So that is one of the goals of the suggestion that's in this memorandum that Manager Scalera and I have been working on. So one part of this would be a much more proactive role by the liaisons, both the trustee liaisons and the staff liaisons, with regard to helping formulate projects and also being alert for the possibility of collaboration among the various commissions. That's also the reason what this recommendation is for is to really now transfer the actual implementation phase of these projects, the actual doing of the projects, to the department heads. Because ultimately the work is going to fall to our departments in any event to actually do the work. There are a number of these initiatives that also are going to require communication with outside agencies. That's another reason that we are suggesting that the department heads now take control of the actual implementation of these projects. So the memorandum you have before you basically has a list of the remaining initiatives that are underway, with the various department heads being identified that would be responsible for implementing those initiatives. Also, in the appendix, you have a guideline for if a commission or a board wants to propose a project that would require either staff time or village funding. And basically what this would require is that the commission would in essence follow the same kind of special event application / memorandum that outside groups have been required, so that that staff would have an opportunity to determine what kind of staff time and funding would be required. So that's our recommendation. So you have it in front of you, and we have some commissioners here. I don't know if they wanted to make any comments about it, and then we had a communication from Trustee Sussman, and then we got a communication from Chairperson Lamantia. So did you want to go through what Trustee Sussman had to say first?
Trustee Sussman had sent an email asking that the following 3 points be made in the discussion for the board to consider this evening. The first is that the term implementation phase is confusing. Is everything listed going to be implemented? I would like this clarified, please. Point 2, I believe we asked Public Works Director Ed Bailey to review our signs and recommend how to consolidate them. I would like sign litter. I would like to see this done before he comes back with recommendations on any additional signs for bikers or cars. And then point 3, what is the process for setting priorities on the work for specific CMAP projects? What is the role of the Board of Trustees versus the commissions in priority setting? And those are the 3 points that Trustee Sussman asked that we share with the board this evening.
And while we're doing, I'll just read what Chair Lamantia, she sent this to commissioners and then sent it to Manager Scalera and I. with regard to the memorandum, it is a clear plan for implementation of many village improvements that were defined via the CMAP initiative and will be discussed at the board meeting this evening. Village staff has been clearly assigned to each objective. Public Works Director Bailey has a significant amount of improvements which we, the LEC, might support him in accomplishing. This is a clear process with clear delegation of responsibility to appropriate village staff. She's complimentary of Manager Sclair and I for this clear game plan and encourage any interested and available LEC members to review the memo and come this evening. So we appreciate that feedback from Chairperson Lamantia. So further discussion? Mr. Wright?
Rich Wade, 262 Lionel Road. I just wanted to inform the board of something. Under infrastructure initiatives, Public Works Director, one of Bailey's tasks was to research lighting for Forest Avenue Bridge. It's interesting that when the county decided to rebuild the bridge on Forest Avenue, there wasn't a preservation commission at that point. But I was on the plan commission. The plan commission pointed out to the board that because we were a National Historic Landmark, they had to seek approval of the work they were going to do on that bridge. That's why the bridge was rebuilt the way it was originally. They would have had just a concrete wall there. And the village informed the county that they had to rebuild it the way it was. That's the way it is. And the Plan Commission at the time recommended that we consider lighting on that bridge. The county said, fine, but we're not going to pay for that. So if the village wants to do it, they'll have to pay for that. And we didn't go any further with that, except that if you went over there and looked at the bridge, you'll find there's some terminations of plastic caps on the top of that balustrade there. They did include, within the concrete work, a raceway that could be used for future lighting, and in fact, they located the terminations where the lighting was proposed to be by the Plan Commission. But we never carried on with that. I think that the actual selection of the fixture is probably an issue that should be presented to the Preservation Commission at this point in time, but the construction is already designed to accommodate lighting. It's built in there. I don't know where it terminates. I don't know how it gets out of there, but you can see the plastic caps if you go there and look at them. In fact, a couple of them have been vandalized. And just as a sidebar issue, the same thing happened when IDOT decided to rebuild the bridge on Ogden Avenue. It was brought to their attention that they had to comply with the wishes of the village because it was a historic landmark, and that was part of the landmark. And that's why that bridge was rebuilt with the configuration of the balustrades the way they are. But no consideration was given to lighting there, obviously. Just a little bit of trivia, but there's some value to knowing that, in fact, the Forest Avenue Bridge is provided with the capacity for lighting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yes, sir.
Eric Sundstrom, 375 Uvedale Road. I want to expand upon what Mr. Ray had said. About 4 or 5, maybe 6 years ago, the Chamber of Commerce looked into putting lighting on the bridge. And we specifically had Mr. Canaveras from Riverside Plumbing look into it, and he looked into various methods, electric, possibly gas, where it would connect into, and he did a lot of extensive work on it. And so if any work is going to be done that way, we should probably reach out to him on it, because he knows what's what. And just for a point of order, he determined that it would probably be cheaper to do it by using gas lamps instead of going with electric. I guess with the electric, it was going to have to be connected from somewhere on the west side of the bridge, and with the gas, he could do it from the Riverside side. And he actually looked into various types of lamps that were very reminiscent of our street lamps as they are right now. But basically, I just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you. Further comments? Go ahead.
I just want to speak to the one question that Trustee Sussman had. She was asking what is meant by implementation. As I understood it, and I think this actually speaks to a couple of questions she had, and I just want to see if the rest of the board shares my understanding, that all of the items that are on this implementation phase, we're presuming that the person that's assigned, person or commission, that's tasked with that, will be bringing back more information, facts, figures, and items for inclusion either in the capital improvement plan or in the regular budget for us to approve. I just presumed that that was part of the procedure. Is that correct?
Well, if there was any funding involved.
Right, if there was funding involved,
like
yes.
the how-to manual is just something that the director would just do.
Right.
Yeah. Right. But basically implementation to me is getting it done.
Okay, but I think what Trustee Sussman was asking was, is that the last time we're going to hear about it until it's done?
Right.
And I did not think that was the case.
No. And some of the points that I did discuss with her is that even though this may seem like a plan where we're going to do this all at once, that's not the case. A number of these things will take time to research, and it will require input from the various commissions for feedback. That once that's all collected, then I think what we envisioned is this, then it could be brought back to the board, and if there is funding that would be required, the board then can decide if it's something that they would want to put into the CIP or something that they're not interested in at all.
And that was my presumption when I read this, but I kind of wanted to circle back to the questions that she had.
How do we know when these items on this list are going to be contemplated for implementation, and how will we be kept as a board abreast of where we are on our CMAP punch list, if you will?
I think it would fall to the responsibility of either the trustee liaison or the staff liaison to provide updates on where they are on certain projects.
To us, okay.
Liaison to what? To the commission?
To the commission.
It looks like all of these things are being done by staff.
By
Doesn't it look like the commissions are even involved in it?
Staff, but all of the individuals that are listed on there, Sonia is assigned to the EDC, and Ed is assigned to the LAC, along with the trustee liaison.
For example, let's take the example of the bridge. I mean, that's a perfect example of why this process was contemplated. Because now we have Mr. Bailey, who is going to be able to look into the feasibility of lighting the Forest Avenue Bridge. We have a department head who has specific expertise in that area that can now go and speak to Mr. Canavera and can go and solicit advisory opinions from the Preservation Commission, and then can put together a proper budget request and come to the board and say, okay, here, you said that you were interested in doing the Forest Avenue lighting. Here are your alternatives for doing the Forest Avenue lighting, and then the trustees will decide which, if any, of those will take place.
Let me throw another one out there. Canoe launches, or a boat launch, or a canoe livery service. Probably Ron, right? Rec department, maybe. But would he reach out for people to help him implement these things, or talk about them, or plan those things? And how would he garnish a committee to help him with that?
Well, for example, with regard to that one, the Parks and Rec Board has already researched that extensively.
Okay.
And so now, they have determined that right at this point that that's not a feasible project at this point because of liability, transportation. The only way that they felt that it would be feasible would be if we had a standalone company that would come in and do it on a contract basis. So, the director then of the department could see if there are companies out there that would be interested in doing that. But I think see the real point of this is at some point you can't have four hands on a tiller. You need one hand on a tiller in order to get a project like this done. And it seems to me that our commission structure, with regard to a few statutory exceptions, they're advisory in nature. They're not really set up to be able to make communications on behalf of the village. They don't have contracting ability. They don't have budgetary authority. That's where that authority would rest with this board. So the idea here is if we're going to have a lead person who's actually going to do the continuous work that it requires to get something like this done, who is the reasonable person to have that be? Our opinion is the department heads that have that specific expertise on that specific project. Because otherwise you're designing a horse by a committee and you end up with a camel.
I have two thoughts. One is, I think we should have some sort of budget or some sort of funding source for what we're doing, because we can spend. I mean, we have staff that is, I think, working extremely hard, doing a lot of other things, and can barely keep up with keeping the village, especially Director Bailey, trying to keep the village, free of weeds and everything else, and Ron is we're starting a new initiative with Hauser. We run a day camp. We run a kinder care kid. We're pushing a lot onto these department heads without telling them what kind of budget they have to work for. Can we have a strengthen or a local bicycle rental? Sure we can. I mean, for $60,000, $70,000 to go buy the bikes. But is that even feasible? Would we even fund that? And I would say probably the answer would be no. So why do we ask these people to do stuff without saying this is what we have? And what I would say is take something, which it would be say the places of eating tax, because that is paid to this village by the 1% that we levy on our restaurants and our bakeries and our stuff like that. And that money, if we can use that to bring more people into the village, only strengthens that pool of money and strengthens those businesses. So then we have a set of dollars to work with. We have $65,000, give or take, to work with. So now we can say, okay, we have $65,000. We're willing to invest 20 into wayfinding, or 10 into this, or 15 into this, and then we have a map, we have a program, we have something that we can work with. But to talk about nature walks and paths and stuff like that, that's great. But A, you have to build it, and B, you have to maintain it. If we can build it, we need to be able to maintain it, because it doesn't do us any good to build it for a year and not be able to maintain it. So we have to have a funding source to do that. So A, I think we should look at some sort of funding mechanism for CMAP initiatives and dedicate it to it. And B, I would like us to table this until Trustee Sussman's part of the conversation. She worked diligently on this for 6 months, 9 months, and I think she should have a seat at the table more than a couple of notes, because I know she feels strongly about it. She spent a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of hours with a lot of people doing this. So I'd really like her to be at the table.
Well, I guess the only thing I would say is that even if you allocate a certain amount of dollars, staff would still need to bring that back for the board to approve. So I think the objective is for staff with the commission's assistance is to go out and look at the options and bring those options back, and then the board decides whether or not you want to fund it. And the funding is the CIP. And every year the board decides whether or not they want to allocate a certain dollar amount from the general fund to fund those projects. So I think you achieve the same goal, but I think you're trying to do it a different way. And I think ultimately anything over 20 has to come back to the board to approve. And so I think it probably makes more sense to do the research, find out what options are available, have you guys talk about it and say, that's a good idea, or no, that's not a good idea. Rather than just saying to staff, you have $65,000 or $60,000 to do these projects. Well then, how does staff determine what do we think you guys would want? I think it'd rather come from you than from us.
We prioritize it.
But that's
which is another part of what Gene said. You prioritize it.
But your comments actually go directly to why I think this is a good idea. Because with regard to, just pick a project, the only way that the trustees can have a realistic number to consider if there has already been research done. So if we say we want rental bicycles, well, we can't just say, well, yeah, let's just pick a number and we're going to say, okay, we're willing to spend this much money on rental bicycles. The idea would be for a professional who has expertise in recreation to come and say, here are 3 different proposals for rental bicycles. This one's 5, this one's 7, this is 20. This is how much they cost. Now, you decide what you want. And with regard to tabling this, there's more to Trustee Sussman's memo. She said, I agree with the need to put the implementation in the hands of the professional staff people. And I appreciate the time you've spent putting this up together. So the only things she had concerns with were the 3 things that Peter mentioned.
I still think it's right for a trustee that has done as much work and has spent as much hours.
Well, all of the trustees have.
Oh, I understand that, but I just think it's...
I'm a little bit confused about where we're at here. Is there action you're looking for the board to take?
This is the recommendation from the village manager and I about how to proceed with the CBAP initiatives. The question is if you don't want to proceed this way, what's your other idea?
Well, I mean, these initiatives we've already approved.
Yes.
I mean, we've already decided as a board that these are the initiatives we want to pursue. When I read this report, it was like, well, yeah, how else do you proceed? There's no other way to proceed. You ask staff to do the research, to do the legwork, advise committees, commissions, and the board, and you keep moving forward. So I view this more as an update more than anything. This is just simply an update of where we're at. I would like, if we want this on the next agenda again so that Trustee Sussman can weigh in, that's fine too, but I don't want staff waiting around for that. Let's keep moving forward in the meantime. I think it was Trustee Foley said something earlier, talked about how the board would be updated and all this. I would ask that something like this memo gets updated and presented on the agenda quarterly to the board, saying, once a quarter, have the same exact, these initiatives listed, here's what's happened in the last 3 months. Whether we need to talk about it for 5 minutes or 50 minutes, whatever, but at least keep us updated formally by having it on the board agenda.
And that actually was something we specifically talked about, and that's what this process would facilitate. Because now you have one person who can prepare those updates and tell us where things stand as we move along. Because otherwise, it's like BBs on the floor. We need to start focusing these energies now, and that's what we have staff for. And these are the folks that are ultimately going to be charged with doing this work. So we're trying just to move that process along now so that we can start picking up some steam.
Tom Lupfer from Life Park District, and for those of you who don't know me, I am the chairman of the Economic Development Commission, and we have a completely different view of this. We think it's a neutering of the Economic Development Commission. A vast majority of us do that. If you look at the memo and you look at the directives the board gave us, they are one and the same. And if you look at our agenda, they are one and the same. I'm freezing. I don't know. I keep looking for David. It's been an hour and so long.
That's what we do to keep people's comments very quick.
Don't wear shoes, I admit.
4 foot for sandals. We've been working diligently on these directives that we got from the board for a year, yet we have not heard from the board, and the board has not heard from us. We're the first commission in the history of the village in memory that does not have a board liaison. We had a staff member as our liaison, then we were assigned another staff member as a liaison. And we don't feel that our establishing ordinance allows this to happen. We are supposed to report to the board in our section 2244B, believe it or not. It says to prepare and recommend to the village board a plan accomplishing 2 goals. And then D says to prepare and recommend to the village board from time to time ordinance changes. It doesn't say to report to staff. We're an advisory board that is charged with helping you with policy. So we feel it's our responsibility to come up with the plans. We actually spent a lot of time on a bike rental program. We spent a lot of time reviewing a lot of this stuff. Spent a year. I don't know if you've actually read our minutes. We've been really active. In fact, to quote the chamber, they said we have gotten more done in a year than they've seen in 36 years. We've had events, we've had broker tours, we've had a meeting with the Berwyn Development Corporation. We had the I Got It Riverside campaign. That kind of energy and activity is now gone with this memo. If you accept this memo, the EDC becomes irrelevant. There's no reason for us to exist if all this is staff. What are we advising them on? If you look at our agenda, we don't have an agenda. If this goes through, our next meeting will be, okay, adjourned for the next meeting. I guess we'll await new directives from the board. So I would suggest you can't necessarily just make this change without going back and changing our establishing ordinance, because this is a fundamental shift in the way the village operates. It is putting staff above appointed commissions. It is giving them decision-making powers that we don't feel staff should have. A perfect example is our RFP for the village visitor center. Commissioner Peters spent lots and lots of time putting together a request for proposal for a visitor center, which was part of our directives on the CMAP. We issued that RFP, we passed it in a motion, and went to the board. But you haven't heard about it, because Village Manager Scalera decided it wasn't time to submit it. We feel that if we spend the time putting together motions, RFPs, and all this kind of stuff, we should have a direct conduit to the village board. That's our establishing ordinance. That's what we were told we were doing. We didn't think we were going to be sitting here spinning our wheels and then having arbitrary decisions based on what? How was that decision based? How was a publicly appointed commission's motion at an open meeting decided to not be forwarded to the board? Did you have decisions in that? How does that square with open government, with transparent government? These decisions are now being taken out of announced meetings with minutes and agendas and put over here. Additionally, I'd like to go through these assignments to see how they will be implemented. Because in a meeting with Public Works Director Bailey, he said he had no time. He said he is so overwhelmed with the street construction aspect of his job, he doesn't have time to do anything compared to the landscape. That's why we have 5-foot weeds in Centennial Park. As a landscaper by trade, I look around this village and it looks abandoned. but our Public Works is now going to get more work? How is that possible? What staff do they have to take this on? We have a community development officer who was hired 6 months ago whose specific job was economic development. We have not seen her at our meetings. She has not gone to a chamber meeting. She has not met a single business person. We're asking these staff members who are overworked to do more work when we have a commission that is ready, willing, and able, with a proven track record of getting stuff done, and now we're just taking it away. Why? What is the reason for that? What does that accomplish? Why would you neuter a commission that is actually finally getting stuff done? I think the solution is give us our budget back. Give us the money to get this stuff done. If putting on a bike race next summer was going to take $5,000 of public works staff time, put that in our budget. We can expend that fund. We can come to you with a recommendation to do that. We don't feel that this is a necessary step. We feel that if this happens, the EDC becomes irrelevant. So we would like to caution you moving forward on this in this manner, again, because of the transparency issues, the responsibilities, the fact that our village employees just don't have the time. I mean, let's go through them again. I mean, who else? Parks and Rec. They don't have time to do this stuff. I mean, we're there all the time. It's chaos. It's chaos. They can't even water the plants we put in across the street. And for good reason. They're overworked. So now we're going to start assigning all this stuff that we have been accomplishing. And if we had our board liaison, you guys would be aware of what we were doing. You would see the accomplishments we're having, and you wouldn't need to have all this being implemented by staff. We are perfectly capable of doing it. We just need a budget and a board liaison.
If I can just respond to a couple of the points that Chairperson Luffer made. A number of the initiatives that the EDC has been successful in achieving this year probably would have taken a lot longer to accomplish if they did not have a staff liaison who was able to expedite the process and to make judgment calls that would allow certain initiatives to move forward. I think it's completely unfair to say that a staff person who was hired for one person, she was not hired for just one person, for one reason. She was hired to run a community development department, which also has aspects of building. And unfortunately, she came in at a time when that whole department was in flux and has been very instrumental in putting that department back together. And is now at a point where she is going to be assuming the staff liaison responsibilities to work with the EDC to move the projects forward. And the second, I guess the final thing is that I don't view this as taking power away from anyone and giving it to staff, because unfortunately staff will always need the advice of the commissions that make this community what it is. And so I think what the goal is, ultimately the commissions are going to talk about this, but a lot of the times the commissions come up with an idea and then turn to staff or to the village to follow it through, and the village then has to find the individuals on staff to carry that goal out. So I think it's pretty unfair, some of the comments that were made here this evening, and I feel that I just needed to put that out.
Peter, the comments were made to point out how overworked staff is and how we don't feel that they would be able to accept more work. If we have someone whose job is part economic development and she's so busy that she can't get to economic development for 6 months, that tells me she's overworked. If we have a public works director who can't get the weeds pulled in our downtown business district, that tells me public works is overworked. That's what I'm saying.
I don't see it that way. I see it as it's my responsibility. If that's happening, then I'm failing in that I'm not properly managing those individuals to ensure that they are allocating their time properly to achieve the goals that they're responsible to do.
No, I wouldn't disagree with you on that. It's been a long year.
I'm confused by the comments. On the one hand, I hear, why don't we have staff support? On the other hand, I hear, we don't want staff support. We want to do it ourselves because staff doesn't have the time or isn't capable.
We would prefer to have a board liaison rather than a staff liaison.
Well, you need both. All committees have both, a board liaison and a staff liaison, correct?
No.
Not all commissions.
Well, most do. I mean, the Planning and Zoning Commission does. I would say my personal opinion is the EDC is a very important committee. They should have both. They should have a board liaison and they should have a staff liaison, just like the Planning and Zoning Commission does. So that's one point. But I guess what I think you're saying, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I think you're saying is you want the Economic Development Committee members to act as staff and actually do the phone calls, pull the weeds from the areas and actually do the day-to-day work.
No.
That's unheard of. I've never heard.
No, and that's actually what this memo to us meant, is that we were going to start staffing booths more than. What we would like to do is say, we have a great idea with a bike race for next summer. Here's the event, here's the cost, here's the staff responsibilities, and we recommend to the board they pursue it. We don't feel that there needs to be a layer between the commission and the board.
But who's going to provide
the board, not staff?
Let me interject. You're going to make that recommendation. You're going to have a discussion at the EDC about having a bike race or whatever. Someone's got to take the minutes. Someone's got to write down a letter to the board recommending that. Someone's got to go and research and say, this is going to cost so much. The police department's going to have to be there. It's going to cost 2 officers. And put all that together to advise you so you can make a recommendation and then to bring that to the village board. That's what staff does. And that's what this memo is saying, correct? Essentially, it's describing that exact process.
The question we have is why the change? Why are we taking the Economic Development Commission, which is reports...
What's being changed?
Well, did you read it? We're reporting to staff now.
No.
No,
you're not.
That's just, you have a radical misreading of this memo.
Yes.
Well, that's a loaded word.
Your job as the EDC, all of our advisory commissions' job is to make recommendations to this board. That doesn't change one whit with regard to this memo. If you have a recommendation for a project, you have now an actual written procedure that you would go through to make that recommendation to this board.
There's 7 steps in that procedure, and I got to tell you, 4 of the commissioners have no interest in having to go through 7 steps. If you look at the hoops that we're going to have to now jump through, this has changed from an advisory commission with some clear directives from the board, getting things done more than we have in 36 years, to basically event coordinators. I mean, it is a major change in the scope of...
I heard it the first time. For you to consider these hoops, all this does is give this board the information it needs to make a determination of your recommendation. And to Trustee Pollack's point, if you're going to propose a bike race, we need to know who's going to run it, who's going to staff it, who's going to be out there at all the various intersections as the bikes go through, how much police do we need, how much.
But we're on the land.
So wait just a second. So who's going to do that? That's where the liaison, and I want to address this point about the liaison, because we've had this conversation with the EDC directly, and I don't know why I keep hearing this complaint. The reason the EDC liaison is the community development director is because the community development director, as part of her job description, is tasked with economic development. It was our opinion that that was actually a plus with regard to Economic Development Commission to have a direct staff liaison, the same way that I am the liaison to the Chamber of Commerce and will be working with Ms. Apt. So we have the kind of synergy and cooperation between the Economic Development Commission, the staff people, and the village board we need. So the complaint that you don't have a board liaison is hollow. If you want a board liaison, and if anybody else on the board wants to take on yet another commission assignment, then if they want to volunteer, I will appoint them to be.
And we asked you at our last meeting for one. We would like one.
But these folks already go to 3 meetings a month, you know, and
Then don't offer it. I'm just saying this is a change our establishing ordinance.
No, it does not. That's where you're misreading the ordinance. The ordinance says that your job is to make recommendations to this board. That remains the case. You're not making recommendations to staff, you're making recommendations to this board. What you're doing is using your liaison as the conduit to help you prepare that recommendation, so that this board has the information it needs to actually make a decision upon your recommendation.
Right, but wouldn't it be normal for us to say we would like to hold a bike race, here's the initial information, here's a company name, the idea, and you say, yes, we think it's good. Staff, why don't you tell us what volunteers we need? I'm a contractor. I don't know what event staff volunteering means, let alone figuring out how to fill out a
That's
form.
That's exactly the point, is that you don't. And our staff people do. So what's wrong with working with staff to actually get those questions answered?
But Tom, you actually said what the purpose of those steps is that the commission would talk about it, make that recommendation to the board would then say that is a good idea, and then assign it to staff to do the homework, and then work with the commission to say, okay, this is what it's going to take to move that project.
So is that what you're saying then? So we pass motions, it goes to the board, and then the board acts on it.
Right. That's the way it's always been. This doesn't change that at all.
Well, it's a radical misreading, I guess, then.
Yes.
It says prepare a memorandum for a special event to submit to commission.
May I make a comment? As someone who sees it is wearing several different hats, as your clerk, but also as someone who's on staff, I don't think there's anything in this appendix with the guidelines that any other organization that comes to us to propose a special event doesn't do. If St. Mary's is having an Oktoberfest, they will submit a special event application. I will guide them through the process. I will send them whatever forms they need for a liquor license or whatever. We get the application back from them with the details of the event. I forward it to the department heads. They discuss it at their staff meeting on the following Monday after we receive it. And they provide feedback if they have concerns. We have something that we're working on in Oktoberfest by a private entity right now, by the Choo Choo. And, you know, fire and building need to make some decisions about a very large tent that Scott wants to put up. So this is how the process works. Not just for EDC, but for anyone who wants to propose an event or who wants to move a project forward. There has to be.
I hear that.
And Kathy, I would add, it's not only the way it works for other organizations in Riverside, that's the way it works in every functioning village government. It's the only way it works.
Well, my only experience is here, so that's all I can speak to.
So the EDC does not look at itself as a special events commission. We're an advisory board that will advise the board saying, here's an idea, we'd like to pursue it, and that's about it. Our volunteer time is the EDC. It's not filling out forms for special events. If I wanted to do that, I would host a special event. I want to serve in the EDC to improve the economic condition of my town. I volunteer by serving on the commission.
You wouldn't be submitting that. That's what the staff liaison would be completing on behalf of the EDC. And
you have the idea, you come to the village,
You
the village
generate the
says yes
idea.
or no, and then it goes to the staff person to do all the legwork.
Thank you. I hear it. I'll take it back to the EDC and see what they say. Dog and promise.
Well, that's fine, but if the board gives the directions to the commissions.
Oh, we're fully aware of that.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Foley, you had something?
You know,
I listened to all this, and I applaud President Sells in his ability and with staff to put together what I consider this to be a punch list. I too am a contractor. We adopted the CMAP program after studying this village of ours 5 or 6 times and spending a bunch of money on it. And I look at some of the punch list items that are in front of us tonight on here. I think some of these things should just be status quo. Keeping the riverfront visible, I don't think that should be a special project that we all of a sudden get our hair in a bonnet and all worried about how it's going to happen. How are we going to maintain it? Because it was something that growing up in this village was just done. It was part of our maintenance program. I think we can weed out. I love a punch list. I live for punch lists, and I love going through a punch list and trying to combine items together, eliminate items by understanding that if preventative maintenance was done, this item wouldn't even be on the list in the first place. And I think this is just another example of this great town of ours. We want to improve, but we just lock up when it comes to the point of saying you're in charge or you're in charge or it's got to come to this commissioner staff. Whether or not the EDC needs a staff and a board member to come to every one of their meetings, that's for them to decide. What I want is for us to look at this punch list, listen to the staff members, listen to the commission members. I mean, you came before us with an idea to clear a stretch of land that went from one point of the village to another for a number that our public works couldn't even touch it. And it would take care of a huge punch list item, and it would make the village pretty in one fell swoop. And yet that information I heard about it secondhand, never came to us, never got to me, so that I could bring it up in a new business, or, hey, did you hear about the guys on EDC, they found somebody that can clear some land. I'm not hearing these things until after the fact. And we're never going to get our punch list together and finish these things. I applaud you sitting down and putting the punch list together and determining which one of the staff members are going to do it. I just want there to be more communication between the commissions that can offer advice to staff. Because, staff doesn't always have all the answers. I don't think they should. But that's just how I feel about this whole thing. We can go through this list and identify things that maybe we're probably already doing and calling it something different in the CMAP program, but we should try to identify those things, like the river view, and not make them all of a sudden crisis emergency, but we should be able to see the river. And make those things. I agree. I think every commission should have representation, should have a voice. I think staff should have a voice too in some of the issues, because they can circumnavigate a problem before it happens. But I just want to see if we're going to adopt this with or without Gene being here or implementing whatever, that we do it in the right way, that everybody is heard, but more importantly, I get to hear some stuff too.
Well, and that's really where the more proactive role of the liaisons is going to come in. I think one of the things that's happened over time, just in my experience of being on the board, is that the liaison position became very laissez-faire.
It was.
And what I, the communication that we've had with the trustee liaisons is we want a much more active role by the liaisons to make sure that the communication that you're talking about that should be happening does happen. And that's really up to all of us.
And to support, I just became the liaison to Martha's wonderful Safe Environment Committee. But when I went to my first meeting, that board didn't know how to come before us. That board didn't really know about a budget process or how to get something paid for. So maybe we need to have staff give them, so you're a liaison now, type of, Do you know what I mean?
I do. This is growing.
So you're a liaison.
We have more activity, we have more action, we have more energy, we have more vision going on right now than we've had in a long time. And so communication is the pivotal point of all of it.
And it's a horrible feeling to be part of a commission where you feel like you're losing traction and sliding backwards because of how your message is getting up to us, to this table, in this room. I don't care. I just want to see things get done in the most cost-efficient, maintenance-free, that would turn you on, right, way of happening. And stop studying it and talking about it and just start implementing things. We got a punch list. Let's divvy it up, let's get to work, and let's get the ideas done.
I agree. So,
I'm Liz Peters. I'm on the Economic Development Commission. I will keep this short. But I do want to second and third. I do think that procedural outline that you guys put together, phenomenal, very helpful. I'd love to see a little more depth in it. And I know it was kind of a first pass. But it goes to my second point, and that is, as I read through it and as I've kind of been thinking and hearing all the comments tonight, I'm a little concerned still to know what our direction is. And again, maybe this only applies to the EDC, but what is our purpose? Because we were tasked with the CMAP initiatives, and so that to me is the purpose, that to me is the idea, and then the implementation of that is now with staff, and I look at it a little bit differently. I look at it, that's fine with me, and I look forward more, and how are we going to implement that in the future? So if we were given a CMAP initiative, for instance, the visitor center, what is it that you expect the EDC to do with visitor center, that task, before it goes on to the staff who's making the calls to various people, who is filling out the forms? What is it that you expect us to do, given that we were the ones that took a big brunt of the CMAP initiatives on our plate initially? Where is it that you see our goals outside of just the CMAP initiatives? What do we do with that after that? Where are you expecting our purpose to lie, I guess?
Well, I think I can address that. I mean, the visitor center is actually a good example of how I think this process should work. The EDC came up with a proposal about doing various things in the pavilion over by the train tracks. So they were of a nature that it was something that the staff had the capability of saying, yes, let's do this. So in terms of picking the signage, in terms of picking the maps, you worked with the village manager and Public Works, and it's gotten done. So you guys came up with the idea, you brought it to the staff. The staff worked with you to say, there are certain restrictions with regard to, you can't put things on the outside until we have an approval or advisory opinion by the Preservation Commission. And so now it's half done already. And so now we're waiting on the lockbox from the chamber that the chamber is donating. We have other signage all going in. So that's exactly, so in fact, almost everything that was on the RFP is being accomplished.
So then, if I hear what you're saying right there at the end, it's that we are to take the idea of visitor center, because that wasn't initially our idea. That came from the CMAP initiative. So we take the idea visitor center, the grand idea, and we come up with the RFP for it, and then we take it to the staff to do. I'm really not trying to create headache. I'm just trying to understand if we're still supposed to be implementing the CMAP initiatives, then that is the idea. We're not really coming up with the ideas, those are the ideas.
Well, no, you're much more than CMAP. I mean, I think maybe that's part of the confusion. Yeah, when the prior board and this board approved and took on the CMAP plan, that's something that we wanted to accomplish moving forward. The first thought was, well, who are the different people who could have input on any given CMAP idea? So on bikes, for example, you could take that we wanted rental bikes. Well, there are a lot of different places that might have had something to say about that. The EDC might have had something to say. Parks and Rec might have had something to say. Landscape might have had something to say. So in the initial pass-through, all of those different groups were identified as groups that would have input on that idea. That part of the CMAP has now largely been accomplished by the commissions. A lot of this has been boiled down now. We have the information largely about the bike rentals, for example. And one of the things that I saw as the process was going on, I mean, we had unfortunate situations where the EDC was doing research that was also being done by the Parks and Rec Board. See, that's what this is designed to try to eliminate. We value so much the volunteer time that our commissioners put in. We don't want duplicate efforts. So if the liaisons are much more active, if staff is much more involved from the implementation side, the hope is that those kind of overlaps, that won't happen. That we'll have a communication system in place so that we're not recreating the wheel. But the Economic Development Commission is much more than CMAP. I mean, if you have ideas that go beyond CMAP, and given the talent on your board, I suspect you do, then those are the kind of ideas you should be bringing and recommendations you should be bringing to the board. And if there are ideas that the board embraces as part of the vision that the board has for the future, then you would work with staff to try to get those things into a workable form to make them happen. But that's really we're really talking about a kind of a shift in the organizational culture where we're trying to increase communication, one, increase collaboration, two, but also have someone, to the punch list metaphor, who is actually accountable. So that when we say, okay, where are we on rental bikes? We know who to go to now. We go to the director of Parks and Rec and say, where are we? And this is what's been done. But in no way does that diminish the input or the value of the advisory component of the commissions. It's just trying to identify who does what. And the actual boots on the ground implementation of these projects should be run by professional staff.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I hope that helps.
It does.
Okay.
Again, it's Marty Megan. I'm the chairperson of the Safe Environment Commission. I just have one question regarding this, and that is on this punch list, is it my understanding that already there are liaisons to the commission who have given input into these projects and will continue to give input in these projects, or has the board assigned commissioners to these to again continually give insight into the individual projects? Which is it?
I don't understand your question.
Well, in other words, your punch list has got directors.
Mm-hmm.
Within the directors, my question is was this punch list created with the input of liaisons of the commissioners, okay, from the various commissions? And if it was, are there any other ones on this punch list where you are assigning a certain commission to give input on these projects?
Can I say something? I think what I'm hearing from everybody, it's finally sinking in, is they're thinking that because Director Apt is in charge of this, that now everyone else is removed from this, and now she's going to go do the bike rentals or whatever. And that's not what this is saying, is my understanding.
Right.
All that putting this person here is saying is, once a quarter, we want someone to come to the board and give us a report, where are we on bike rentals, okay? That's the person who's going to be responsible for that. That doesn't remove the commissions from this process at all.
Right.
The commissions are still going to have the same input that they've always had. And so it's not like only the EDC is going to be involved in that. Whoever would need to be involved in that project would still be involved in that project. So it's not like we would say, well, only this commission gets to talk to Director Aft about this. Whoever needs to be will be involved, correct? This is only...
The commission can decide whether or not they need to be involved.
Sure. Absolutely.
That's my question.
You can decide to get a whole other commission involved to help you.
This is only to make sure that, you know, sometimes we have commission meetings or any meetings, and the subject just keeps going round and round and round, and for 10 years we're talking about should we have a visitor center or not.
Sure.
Okay? This is because we want to make sure that these things are implemented. So we're putting someone on staff who we have control over to say, okay, you need to make sure that this is implemented. Now what's going to happen here? That doesn't mean that everyone else isn't involved who wants to be involved in that project. And no one is going to be excluded from it because, you know, we're saying only this person is in charge. This is only the person reporting it from staff's purposes to the board. It does not remove any of the commissions from...
Okay, yes. So again, what I'm hearing from you is all the commissioners will have the opportunity to give some buy-in if they need to or if they want to on any of these
We are not
projects.
changing the commission structure.
Right.
That is not what this has to do. That, like Mike said, this is a punch list with who is ultimately responsible for the implementation. It has nothing to do with how commissions are run, any of that.
Okay.
Well, the only caveat that I would say is the appendix. I mean, you know, if a commission wants to recommend a project that's going to require...
But if you actually go through the steps,
then-
it's pretty
then-
much what we've been doing anyway. It's just formalizing some of the things. Just like we said, anytime something was brought, there would be minutes taken, there would be that type of thing. You just didn't see all the things that went on behind the scenes that are now outlined in this memo. So it's not really a big change.
Thank you.
I don't see it.
Thank you.
How many commissions and boards do we have? 10? 8? I think I got 8 figured out.
We have a lot. We have more than just about any community that I'm aware of. 13. Okay, so are we good with this? Can we move on now to? Yep. Okay. All right. Did you have something you want to say, Jerry?
I moved over and then I was going to pass given the late hour. But the comment, keep questioning. The comment about how many commissions do we have kind of resonates. And I've made this comment at EDC meetings that I've been following for most of the last year. I think we have about 100 people involved in the commissions, which is great on one hand. On the other hand, it's a lot of people to be involved in government. And then one of the points I made with EDC was, and with Peter, is please, 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 your government. We have expertise in public works. We have expertise in department heads, but your government. And I think, I mean, the board's not. You guys are real jobs. It's a certain professional expertise and so on, like the commissioners. But in terms of creativity, I think you're going to find you have more on the commissions in terms of the business side of the creativity. And I don't mean this as a slight against anyone in government, but in government, the best thing you can do for economic development, for example, is give permission to businesses. Make the law, make the more, as much of the red tape and so on and so forth, which I know you've been trying to do, make that go away, do the hand holding to get through it. A frustration I've seen with EDC, and I was on it 20-some years ago, and I followed it. This is the strongest group this community has had in the 25 years I've been in town. And there is a tension and there's a frustration and everybody's struggling through it, and you guys are and we are. But please, just keep working with it. And it is late and I'm losing my train of thought. You guys want to go home, so thank you.
Who's still reading stuff?
She's here. Okay. Well, even though we have a late hour, Let's move to our last agenda item, which is the five-year financial forecast.
Well, I'll try to be brief.
Okay.
I know that there was an abundance of information that my voice is starting to go. An abundance of information that was sent out with regard to the financial forecast. It's a 5-year financial forecast. We started doing this in 2012. Upon my arrival, I had made the recommendation of, I don't want to say prolonging, but making the budget cycle a little bit more cyclical in nature with a 10-year capital improvement plan, a 5-year financial forecast, which would then afford us a baseline going into the budget process. So essentially, we start the budget discussions a little bit earlier than was custom previously. During the July board meeting, we did discuss the capital improvement plan, which will be brought back as part of the budget process. This forecast that is provided for the 5-year provides the framework. By no means what is included for the 2015 is what is going to be presented to the board. Also, with regard to the 2014 projected, that will again change once numbers are refined, as that is only through mid-July, our projections for what was available for revenues. So I just want the board to bear that in mind when reviewing this. Both, as I stated previously, both the capital plan and the financial forecast provide the baseline for the budget process, and it will continue. It's a very fluid process, and so it will evolve from July to what is ultimately presented then in September for the board to review. For the purpose of this discussion is to solicit any questions that the board may have with regard to the forecast, because it also provides trend information of historical where we have been, where we are currently, and what potentially can happen with both revenues and expenditures going into the 5-year mark. Also, with regard to this, are some questions that need to be addressed as it relates to planning or issues to consider for fiscal year 2015. I can read through them. Do we want to discuss them item by item, or would you like, President Sells, would you like me to outline one item and to allow the board for discussion and then hit the other particular questions? The first one, as it's outlined under the issues to consider for fiscal year 2015,
sure.
The first one is the tax levy rate for Parks and Recreation. As outlined in the packet, we historically have done the minimum requirement for Parks and Recreation. There is a maximum allowable. With the EAV, it has slightly recovered, but not completely. And whether or not we want to continue that trend for the presentation of the budget in September. Included is the EAV. Over the past 3 years, it has decreased with regard to Parks and Recreation. 2014, we're estimating that it will increase. As with any economic recovery, it takes, there's always a lag. Similar to an economic downturn, there's a lag with regard to both CPI and also with EAVs. Previously, the board's direction has been we would include only the minimum rate for the tax levy, and if there was additional funding that was needed by Parks and Rec, it would be discussed by the village board and appropriately provided if necessarily deemed by the board.
So that's a question. What do you guys think?
Well, I note that at the rate, we're down 20% from where we were in 2010 in what we're collecting.
Correct.
Which would indicate to me that, I mean, I don't know what Parks and Recreation is saying. I'm just saying that in 2010, we were getting 20% more in tax levy.
You said there's a lag. When do you see this? What kind of recovery?
We have a triennial reassessment. So next in 2014, we will have a reassessment year. So for that levy, well, you won't see it on tax bills until 2015, but it's technically the 2014 levy. So essentially Parks and Rec, if there is a bump, they will not feel it until 2016 when we get the new numbers. So there's always going to be that lag similar
January
to
2016?
well, it would be the first installment for 2016. So it would, correct.
You know, being the liaison to Parks and Rec.
Yes.
The Parks and Rec has run a surplus over the last several years. Even as the EAB has gone down, they've had a surplus, and they've done an excellent job. And I'm going to talk about something their new initiative. But you know, one of the things that they do is they fund their own capital improvements with that excess. And I think what in the last year and past years, what we've said is to leave rec at the 0.667, and then if needed, we would then step in at capital improvements. So I would say we'd keep them at the 667 and the EAB. That would be my 2 cents.
Okay. The next item is with regard to the police pension. As included in the consent agenda this evening that was approved, or it was accepted by the village board, was the actuarial results by the village actuary, Tim Sharp, which showed the recommendation for the village's tax levy for 2014, which will come on the tax bills in 2015. He was recommending that we increase the levy to $695, $931. If you recall last year, his recommendation was actually for $660. The board, $660,000. The board decided to essentially contribute an additional $30,000. The board did not formally adopt changing the rate of return. However, by increasing the levy by an additional $30,000, essentially we were ratcheting the rate of return by 0.25%. If you look at the history that was provided as it relates to the levy for police pension, the information with regard to the pension costs, you'll see from fiscal year 2001 projecting out to 2019 with the 5 years in the forecast estimating a 10% increase. Because if you look at historically, back in 2001, what was actually levied was $159,000, whereas today we're at $690,000. With the annual increases, and then also we have to contemplate retirements with individuals within the police department having 20 years or more service. They would be eligible for retirement once they turn 50 years of age. We have individuals that are well in excess of those 20 years. So it's just something I want the board to bear in mind, whether or not they want, when staff prepares the budget, whether we should anticipate contributing that additional $30,000, essentially putting in a levy for $725,000, or whether or not we want to go with the recommendation of the village actuary at $695,000, which would only be approximately a $5,000 increase. But the reason why I provided the forecast and to show the 10% is more of is a little bit more of a proactive approach with funding, because we've seen that spike, and I wanted to show the history of where those spikes in fact took place. And once retirements begin to occur at a quicker pace, we've had one retirement just this year. We have another individual that is eligible that has left the village to work for another community that is eligible for annuity beginning later this year. So that obviously is not contemplated in Mr. Sharp's actuary numbers, because that won't be included till next year. So we're going to notice that number go up. Every time we have a retirement, granted we have a new employee coming in to stabilize those numbers, but the payout of annuities increases on an annual basis, and just keeping up with that pace is important to note, because if we're asking the pension fund to transfer money over to the village more than what we're putting in, that can become problematic because our funding level drops. Currently, the village's funding level is 45% for the police pension fund.
So the basic question is 660,000, 690,000, or 695,000?
Well, 660 was for 2014.
Right.
We opted for 690, so the question is whether or not we want to do 695 or 725, or anything beyond that. So 695 would be the base.
Oh, I see.
725 is adding the 30,000.
Right.
Correct.
But the actuary recommended 695.
Correct. It's similar to last year. He had recommended 660,000, and we contributed an additional 30.
And what's your recommendation?
For a proactive approach, I would say minimally, what we can do is we can budget for the 725, levy the 695, and if we notice that we are running a surplus for fiscal year 2015, then we can contribute that additional 30. So basically budgeting the expense, but only for the property tax levy, doing what the actuary is requesting.
Okay,
So,
stop right there. Does that work with everybody?
Okay. The next item is with regard to the village's deductible. With last year during the budget process, we opted for the $50,000 deductible. Thus far, the village has not attained the $50,000 deductible, and as a proactive approach in speaking with the village auditor, they were in agreement with my recommendation that if we end the fiscal year and there are open claims up to that $50,000 threshold, then I will speak with Irma, find out what the reserves are, and expense it in fiscal year 2014. So you'll see the expense booked in the appropriate year. It will go into I'm sorry if I'm talking accounting.
What decision do you need from us? Yes or no?
Essentially, whether or not we want to stay at the $50,000 level, or if we want to move to a $100,000 deductible, or if we want to go to a lower level.
So what's your answer?
You're the one that talked about it before.
I don't want to go higher than 50, but.
So you want to stay 50?
But, Joe wants to go to 2 million, so somewhere in between.
I pushed for 50. I was happy with 50.
I'm okay with 50. I'd go for 100, but I'm okay with 50.
Okay, 50 it is.
We'll remain at 50.
Considering we're 10.
The next item is with regard to the sewer rates under the water and sewer fund. Yes, sir.
This seems like a big one to me, that is going to require more discussion than something to begin at 10:15.
And if the board wants to discuss it, I can provide additional analysis as to the impact.
I think that this is something that we want to consider.
Explore.
Yeah, this is something that should be considered.
Okay,
But
then I will
not
go
tonight.
ahead and
Yeah.
certainly. Number 5 is with regard to the E911 fund. In fiscal year 2013, we decided to begin funding a portion of the dispatcher personnel expenses from E911. Last year, we decided to increase it by CPI, whether or not we want to do that again for fiscal year 2014, or at least prepare a budget that has that contemplated.
Any recommendations?
Yes.
I think, yeah. I have a question about the E911 though.
Correct.
So it says here that the fund balance is expected to be $595,000 at the end of fiscal year 2014. But then over in the 5-year finance forecast summary in detail, under E911, it shows ongoing deficits. Is that because you're not applying the fund balance?
Correct. That is just based on revenue, expense, surplus, or deficit for those respective years. It doesn't contemplate utilization of that.
But in reality, that's what the fund balance is there for, is to fill the
Correct.
gaps, right? Okay.
Correct.
So CPI? Yes. Okay.
And then finally, with regard to the annual maintenance cost that is paid by the parking lot fund to the general fund, whether or not that additionally should be increased by CPI, and also whether or not staff should review current fees for parking permits and whether or not they should be increased.
When's the last time we increased our parking fees?
2009.
I think we should look at, oh, it says right there. I think we should look at that.
And I would encourage adjusting for CPI here as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Those were all the items.
See how easy that is? All you have to do is ask.
Thank you very much.
This is excellent work.
Thank you.
Thank you for staying.
Before, Jessica?
Yes.
Commuter fees, do we charge different for resident versus non-resident?
We cannot, because some of the property is BNSF. There's a lot of communities that are similarly situated. If it was all village property, then we would be able to do resident, non-resident rate, but because part of that property is shared by BNSF, we cannot do that. There's a lot of communities that are in that particular same boat, because you can't discriminate for commuter permits, essentially.
So we do have a need for an executive session tonight to discuss the potential lease or sale of real estate. So I would ask, there will be no final action taken during the executive session. We will not reconvene. So with that in mind, I would ask for a motion to adjourn. Motion by Mr. Foley, second by Ms. Collins. Please call the roll.
Trustee Hamilton. Aye. Trustee Pollak.
Aye.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Foley.
Meeting is adjourned.
Here.